Could we please rise for the pledge? Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Just two quick housekeeping items. Please be advised that board members receive agenda items with supporting documentation well in advance of board meetings, in many cases 2 weeks prior to. By doing so, this gives board members the opportunity to ask questions, to provide advance input, and to decide how they may vote on agenda items prior to the board meeting. Also, please be reminded that the first opportunity for residents to speak under statements from residents is for agenda items only. The second opportunity for residents to speak is under discussion. Okay, can I get approval of the agenda? First, Aaron, second, Henry. All in favor? 4-0.
Just want to make sure everybody knows that resolution 186 was withdrawn.
Thank you. I would also like to thank Brendan Gorman for attending the first half of the school year. Thanks again for your input. It's very valuable, and we appreciate you taking the time out to attend these meetings.
Thank you for giving me this experience. Thank you.
Mr. Poole, Superintendent's report.
Good evening, and thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to start off with a congratulations to our Miller Avenue students for 2 accomplishments. In January, they raised or delivered over 122 dog toys and treats to the Brookhaven Animal Shelter as some of their fundraising and service learning opportunities, and 150 pounds of food were donated by students to local food pantries. So congratulations to the Miller Avenue students. And if you missed the Wading River SRO standing room only play of Return of the Glass Slipper, I'd like to commend the entire 5th grade, Mr. Paranello, Mr. Verity, and all of the staff that participated in that. The performance was outstanding. I'd also like to congratulate several of our Wading River students who represented us at the Long Island String Festival. Those students are Jacob Adams, Max Borum, Sophie Gunther, Ray Hidaka, who was also selected as concert master, Emily Call, Megan Penzick, Brannon Smith, and Terrence Winter. So excellent work by them, and congratulations to them for their musicianship. Yep. Our winter, in an upcoming meeting, we'll have our winter season awards, but I just want to make a quick highlight for wrestling for for Eddie Troiano, who this season achieved his 100th career win in wrestling this year. So congratulations to Eddie for that accomplishment. And finally, under athletics, I'd like to recognize Jason Lauser, just incredible. We keep seeing his name up on the marquee in front of the high school and in the paper. He won the county championship in the 500 freestyle and 100 breaststroke. He'll be competing on March 1st and March 2nd at the state meet in the individual medley and the 100-meter breaststroke. So let's wish Jason luck and a job well done. So definitely an amazing athlete. So I'd like to thank as well, we just concluded a strategic planning focus group meeting this evening. I'd like to thank the residents that came out this evening to participate. I'd like to thank all of our faculty this past month who participated in focus group meetings, as well as our students from each building that participated. Our next step is going to be to finalize the broad themes and the goal areas, and then begin as a district to develop small annual goals with measurables, and schedule a few meetings with a variety of stakeholders to review and revise as appropriate our mission, vision, and value statements. I'd like to thank as well the Board of Education for their leadership and support, and our district strategic planning administrative team of Dr. Meyer, Ms. Esposito, Ms. Wallbauer, Mr. Paranello, Mr. Piazzi, Mr. Hayward, Mr. Meinster, and Mr. Arcuri for their work in developing the strategic planning process. I'm very excited as well to announce tonight that on the agenda is the awarding of the High School Bond Award. You know, you may be aware that some wonderful work has happened through the bond across the past few summers. This summer will be no different. The high school already has had some extensive work done, such as the auditorium, gym bleachers, renovated science labs, tennis courts, new lockers, a new turf field, as well as new windows and a new phone system. But planned for this summer and on the agenda tonight, anticipated work includes remodeling and redesigning the cafeteria and kitchen area, renovated main office for the high school, nurse's office, guidance offices, and mental health suites. Additional work includes a renovated parking lot and driveway, additional air conditioning, painting, classroom ceilings, upgrades to the theater, such as LED lighting and sound systems. So many thanks to our community who has supported this work, which is in turn going to support our students' success. I'd also like to note that this evening, the Board of Education will be appointing an interim assistant principal, Ms. Mary Castigli, who's going to serve in that role for the remainder of the year or until such time as we've identified a permanent replacement for Dr. Winfield, who has resigned from the position. Ms. Castigli comes highly recommended and has many years of service as a successful high school AP. I'd like to thank Dr. Winfield for his years of service to our students and to our district as well. Additionally, this evening, this is our first of many budget workshops for the 2019-20 school year. The district, again, has used a zero-based budget developing approach, and all departments and buildings throughout the process met with Cabinet to review proposals line by line. So we look forward later this evening to sharing the budget program highlights this evening and some additional information on the tax cap calculations and state aid for the upcoming school year. And finally, we are putting two board meetings into one because the last board meeting we had a snowstorm. But tonight as well, we'll be having an update presented on the instructional diagnostics programs in the school district, Ag-Ready and Alex. So, that concludes my report. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Poole. Opportunity for board members. Mr. Smith.
Thank you. Mr. Poole's kind of stole some of my thunder, but I did have the opportunity, unique opportunity to attend the LISFA concert, and I just want to give special recognition to our music department. What a phenomenal job they do, especially Mrs. Fasano with our orchestra. I know how much time the kids put in, how hard they worked for those 3 days, and I would have paid money to see that show. That's how good it was. So I want to commend them again for all their hard work and dedication.
Great, thank you. Statements from residents?
No.
No? Okay. All right. Old business. Briarcliff building update, Mr. Poole?
So this evening on the agenda as well is an initial award for a realtor service to support the district in the lease or sale of the Briarcliff building. As we all may recall, last year the Shoreham-Wading River School District conducted a series of community discussions and forums to review the future of the Briarcliff property. The Board of Education recognized the importance of community input and designed a series of public events intended to allow residents to share their suggestions with the Board of Education. Several public hearings were held as well as a community roundtable discussion. The Board of Ed invited residents as well over the spring to submit comments directly to the Board of Education. Throughout the process of community involvement, the Board of Education directed administration to review community suggestions for the use of the property and its future and to inform the Board of Education of those findings. As a result of the community meetings, public discussions, and the analysis of different options for the Briarcliff property, last June, a resolution was passed directing administration to develop an RFP to explore the sale or lease of the Briarcliff property. This fall, the district released a request for proposals to support the district in the lease or sale of the Briarcliff building. A committee made of board trustees, administration, and a representative from the Shoreham Village and Shoreham Pacific Association reviewed and evaluated the proposals. Subsequent to the committee's evaluation, the board interviewed the vendor Jones, Lang, and LaSalle in executive session, which is on the agenda tonight to be awarded the right to represent the district as a realtor in regards to the Briarcliff building. This award will be subject to an agreed-upon contract, which will be subsequently adopted by the board. At such time, we anticipate inviting the realtor to attend a public meeting.
Great, thank you. Reports and reviews. 2019-2020 budget program overview, state aid and tax levy limit calculation.
So this evening, we are going to share some the budget overview and some information on state aid and the tax cap calculation. So we'll start with the budget overview. It's just important to point out to everybody that while the budget includes new programming, the budget as well continues to support programming that goes above and beyond the New York State requirements for education in the state. And point out a few items that are up there, such as the collegiate dual enrollment program, an AP program, the instructional technology program, access to BOCES career, technical education programming. Additionally, the budget supports below average class sizes, the district's 5 through 12 theater program, the community program, elementary tutoring, the women in science and engineering program, secondary library makerspaces. So it's important to see that inside of the budget, all these wonderful programs for our students are continued. The robotics program, instrumental program that begins in grade 3, championship sports high school programs, exceptional special education programming in the school district. For example, just good to share too as well that all those wonderful programs that are in the budget are supporting great outcomes for students. For the 2017-18 school year, the high school has been nominated again for a blue ribbon. The high school has been recognized as an honor roll high school by the College Board. 95% passing rate on Regents exams. Our advanced Regents designation rates keep improving. 95% of our students attend college when they leave here. Multiple athletic championships, and our students are going on to great universities. Fiscally, the district continues to have a fiscal stress score of 0, AA bond rating. A great point of pride is the work that's happening with the bond, strong community support in the school district for our students and programs, and a wonderful, wonderful music instrumental orchestra and a chorus program in the school district where our students are earning accolades as well. Students are earning 1,000 plus college credits each year through our AP program. We've had students who have been automotive skills championships. We have an ongoing partnership with universities such as Columbia and with science research organizations such as Brookhaven, Stony Brook, and Cold Spring Harbor. So it's important to note all of those wonderful things that are in the budget that are maintained for our students and community. So, this is a new slide for us this year, Shoreham-Wading River Value. If you take a look up on the left there, it makes the point that we have these wonderful programs and great outcomes, and the per pupil expenditures from the latest census data, we are spending $4,000 lower than the Long Island average per student. Last year, the tax levy was the second lowest on Long Island. In fact, there was a tax levy decrease. The graduation rate ranked 7th on Long Island and 25th for all of New York State. Special ed graduation rate ranked 1st in Suffolk County, and our advanced Regents designation rates were 37 out of 124 districts. So for an average cost, we're getting a great value for our students in the community, and just a graphical representation of those green dots represent school districts. The blue is Shoreham-Wading River, and you can see the per pupil costs are at the median, but the graduation rate is at the top. Excuse me. Make a point about prudent fiscal management that sort of is reflected in the 1920 budget. Every year for just about every school district, operating costs rise by 3 to 5% based on contractual costs, services, health insurance, pension contributions. The 2019-20 budget for the Shoreham-Wading River School District includes a budget-to-budget growth rate of just 1.5%. So while our operating costs have risen, the district, through declining enrollment, which impacts staffing needs, has been able to identify savings to support a low budget-to-budget increase. So just an overview of some of the enhancements to our program. Just to make the point again that the 1920 budget maintains all current programming, enhances student offerings, and supports maintenance projects and one-time equipment purchases. So under the category of safety and security, The proposal includes a system, the ability to sustain and continue to implement an access control system that's integrated for our security video, our doors, and our alarm management system. It supports additional video cameras, additional perimeter fencing. The district has blood trauma kits across the school district. It supports replacing some of those key components of those kits. Replaces 2 security vehicles, crash gates for Prodell, Wading River and Miller Avenue, and an asphalt path for Miller Avenue rear emergency field egress. Thank you. Curriculum. The expansion of the one-to-one Chromebook initiative to grades 9 through 12. It's been a wonderful success in grades 6 through 8 the last couple of years. An additional secondary reading intervention resource for ELL students and remedial readers at the secondary level, Achieve 3000. A middle school robotics curriculum unit. The VEX robotics team this year at the high school competed for the first time in a tournament. This will help middle school kids get engaged and excited about the future. The development of a hydroponics science unit for the middle school. A greenhouse, the plans for a greenhouse have been submitted to be built, and that should be built at some point next school year for the middle school. So a curriculum and equipment for that greenhouse is necessary. Breakout EDU resources district-wide. That is a puzzle and a game format for instruction, sort of like an escape room kit for classroom teachers to better engage students. An online high school newspaper, and several new high school electives, including independent research, peer mentoring art, and a peer mentoring music lab, adaptive phys ed mentoring, a new health course, Foundations of a Healthy Life, and fashion design too. Additionally, the clubs that we added last year and the last couple of years have been very successful and popular, so we have a few more to add to our elementaries next year. Miller Avenue is going to add a coding club. The Wading River building is going to be adding a bell choir, newspaper club, play pals, and a chess club. The middle school, intermediate best buddies, and the high school will offer a SAD club additionally next year. Okay, on to fine arts. In the budget, there's a proposal to replace the high school acoustical band shop, to provide additional support for the fine arts program through the hiring of a consultant across the school year to review and consider our program and look for enhancements for the K-12 art, music, and theater program, and it supports a new program for students, their participation in the New York State Art Teachers Association Olympics of the Visual Arts. Athletic program enhancements, the football uniforms, replacing those. A new unified athletics basketball team that is a sort of a best buddies basketball team that joins regular education students with special education students. It is a interscholastic league. There are referees competitions, so that's a new athletic program available to students. A new online registration system for athletics called Family ID. We're piloting that now with parents. That should make it easier for parents to register, submit physical information, and the expansion of the temporary fitness center from A102 to A101 and 102 next year to have both of those rooms serve as a temporary fitness center for the next school year. Some proposed one-time equipment purchases. We need a new grounds truck, a forklift. We continue to think about ways to protect our students from ticks on school grounds, and a tick control blower is a new tool that, along with degrubbing, promises to lower the amount of ticks. High school main office furniture that's going to support the summer bond work. I mentioned the new greenhouse equipment for the middle school greenhouse. We need to start replacing interactive smart boards from the technology bond, so there's money in the budget to do that. Installing a permanent audio and visual system for Miller Avenue, the all-purpose room and Wading River cafeteria, similar to the new setup in the auditorium here. Cameras for the inside of our buses, and to support the new layout for the high school entry, a portable visitors booth. Some additional proposed one-time maintenance projects. So we continue to keep our facilities at a high level, so replacing ceilings and lights in the grade 2 hallway, the Wading River locker rooms, the middle school back gym hallway, to support the bond project, replacing the carpet in the high school pit, hallway runners, protect our floors, replacing the grade 3 classroom counters and sinks, and the installation of an air conditioning units in the high school chorus and band rooms. Part of the bond project involves insulation between the boilers and those spaces, but the air conditioner will definitely help keep those rooms above the boiler at a tolerable temperature. And then a proposed one-time transfer to cafeteria fund, startup costs associated with the expansion of the Miller Avenue lunch program. The cafeteria Podell certainly is designed to accommodate supporting cafeteria food at the Miller Avenue schools, so that is in the proposed budget as well. It's also inside of the budget. It's important not to forget that inside of the budget is the full annual payment related to the 2015 voter-approved bond. So just to share a few things that are supported by the budget that were completed with the bond work. We see site work at our elementary schools. Playgrounds, libraries, science rooms, new roofs across the district, a new cafeteria, bleachers, floor systems, lockers. It's the Miller Avenue library, the middle school library, the carpeting in the high school library, the new auditorium. So inside of the proposed budget is the full annual payment, the athletic complex at the high school, the track here at the middle school, new additions and renovated classrooms, the Wading River cafeteria, the middle school cafeteria, bathrooms and kitchens. So a lot of work has happened through the bond, and those payments are now in fully in the 2019-20 school budget. So just to make note that the high school bond projects for the summer, I mentioned earlier, related to the theater, site work, cafeteria, the main office, so the parking lot, kitchen, serving line, renovating the main office and mental health suite, and additional work in the theater plan for the summer bond work. So I know that Mr. Arcuri will go a little bit deeper into the state aid and the tax cap calculation, and we'll be spending more time over the next couple of months talking about the numbers and the dollars associated with the budget. But as I mentioned earlier, the proposed expenditure budget represents a 1.57% year-to-year increase. That does, through the tax levy cap calculation that Mr. Arcuri will share with you in a moment, it does leave us with a 2.9452% tax levy for the 2019-20 school year. And just briefly, a few important budget development dates. Next meeting, March 12th, we'll be reviewing employee salaries and benefits, transportation, debt and transfers, special ed. And on March 26th, we'll be continuing presenting different areas of the budget, such as facilities and curriculum and athletics. April 9th is the revenue budget meeting after the enacted budget by the New York State legislative bodies. And then April 16th is budget adoption. So, thank you. I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Arcuri and Ms. Cangelione to review the state aid and the tax levy calculation.
Thank you, Mr. Poole. Just want to say it's amazing to see how many new things we're bringing to the district next year. It's a very small fiscal impact. So thank you. Thank you for your work.
Just right now go a little bit over the state aid that was recently presented in the governor's executive budget. Based on the governor's executive budget, state aid will make up approximately 16% of our annual budget revenue. Foundation aid accounts for the majority of the state aid we receive, which is approximately 52% of the state aid. The other majority of our aids that we receive, BOCES, public excess costs, private excess costs, transportation, and instructional material aids and technology aids, are expense-driven aids that are calculated based on a variety of ratios as well as the actual expenses of the district. High tax aid is a funding in our, a large funding in our state aid projection that has not changed from the 2017-18 level. That particular aid has been the same for a few years. Building aid is projected based on estimated expenses and completion dates. Final building aid received depends on the date of final completion, cost allowances for SED, final building aid rate, and actual expenditures. So now you'll see a summary of the executive budget that was released in January. The final governor's budget comes out April 1st, and based on that is those are the numbers that will be in our final revenue budget. Foundation aid, which I said earlier makes up about 52% of our overall aid, is an SED calculation, which is not based on expenses. We are at a minimum, the minimum that increase that a school district can receive, which is 0.25%. BOCES aid, we've seen a slight increase, and that is based on the fact that the ratios went down slightly, although our expenses went up a little bit. So those two items together, we have almost a break even in our BOCES aid. High excess costs and private excess costs, those are two items that will change throughout the year, and even as the year goes out. Those are once the final costs for certain students and education and tuition costs come in. For these two costs, once we reach a certain threshold for tuition rates, we are aided on the amount above that threshold. So, but unfortunately, as like we are with many of our other public access, or many of our other aids that are based on ratios, our ratio is going down also for our public and private excess costs. But we do see, as of right now, we do see a slight increase in those aids. Hardware and technology, software, library, and textbook aids, they're also known as instructional material aids. They're based on enrollment, so they go hand in hand. As if our enrollment does decrease, those aids will generally decrease a little bit. Transportation aid is also based on a ratio and expenses. Our expenses went down slightly, and our ratio went down slightly for transportation aid. So overall, we expect to see about $140,000 decrease in transportation aid. Without building aid, our overall decrease is approximately $48,000. Building aid from year to year, we are seeing a budgeted decrease of $422,000. This is based on the information that was in last year's governor's budget, which is based on the building projects that are coming to fruition right now. The governor is using information from 2016, 2017 to estimate when he estimated our 2018-19 building aid. They expected that we would begin receiving on certain projects building aid in 18-19, and that they were also going to be paying us retroactive payments for 17-18. So the way they calculate building aid kind of resulted in us having like an inflated building aid number that we were using for our budget for 2018-19, because it actually, the initial projection included 2 years worth of building aid for certain projects. So that is what would account for us going from $2.4 million to $1.9 million in building aid. The $1.9 million is, I think, where now that those projects are built into our aid, where we can expect to see our numbers kind of sustain that going forward, and plus any projects that are completed after this date. So overall, including building aid, we are expecting to see about a $471,000 decrease, or 3.69%.
Any questions first, before we jump into the next piece?
I had a quick question. The school district received several pilots.
Yes.
I think we're expecting the pilots to remain constant to what they were last year, or has there been any
I'm going to
revisions?
cover them in about 2 slides.
Okay. And do you talk about what percentage of the budget those pilots are? Okay, great.
Anything pertaining to the aid? We're good? Excellent. The 2019-20 tax levy limit calculations due to the Comptroller's Office February 28th. So what you're seeing tonight will be what we plan on filing. The formula is based on a calculation provided from the New York State Comptroller's Office. This isn't something we have control over. Right now, we have no intention on piercing. The current tax levy is a 50% plus one vote only. The allowable limit for us is 2.9640%. As Mr. Poole pointed out earlier, we aren't levying to the entire limit. We are about $10,000 below what we are able to levy to. The calculation includes the following exclusions: all debt service payments. So the entire payment, both principal and interest, that is attached to the $33.5 million bond, as well as all anticipated pilot payments, the LIPA payment, the crosstown cable payment, the FTS Project 2 solar farm payment, and the Shoreham Solar Commons payment, as well as the building aid that is currently projected based on the governor's executive proposal. So if we look at some important definitions of the calculation, the tax levy is the amount raised by taxes in order to fund the budget. The tax-based growth factor, this is based on a determination of the New York State Department of Tax and Finance. It is, what is the brick and mortar change within our community? What actually has been added to the tax roll? What should they account for? Pilots. Pilots are payments that certain businesses pay in lieu of paying property taxes. This is a predetermined amount that the whether it's the solar company, whether it's a crosstown cable pilot, they negotiate that with the Brookhaven Industrial Development Agency, come up with a fixed amount based on what they feel that property, or what that property is being used for, should warrant them paying in taxes. So as opposed to property taxes, they pay a payment called a payment in lieu of taxes. Capital tax levy exclusions. These are debt service payments related to energy performance contracts and bond principal and interest payments. And another exclusion is the building aid portion of the anticipated state aid revenue. Allowable levy growth factor, the lesser of 2% or inflation factor. For 2019, it is important to point out that the inflation factor is 2.44%. So even though the average is 2.44% over a 12-month period, we are capped at a 2% figure. It's also very, very important, I think, to point out from a slide Mr. Poole presented earlier, our year-to-year expenditure projection is only a 1.57% increase. So even though it's a 2.4% CPI increase, we are only increasing expenditures 1.57%. So if we actually look at what the tax cap formula is, I I have printed it here for you. The portions that pertain to us are the total taxes levied for the prior fiscal year. We will multiply that times the tax-based growth factor. We will add the pilot's receivable from 1819. We will subtract the capital tax levy exclusion from 1819. We will multiply that times the 1920 allowable levy growth factor. I'm quizzing you later. You will subtract your pilot's receivable that we anticipate receiving for 1920, and that will come up with what our tax levy limit before 1920 capital exclusions is. From that amount, we will add the capital tax levy. Again, what are the exclusions allowed for 1920? And that will tell us what we are able to raise taxes for in 2019, 2020. So if we work through the formula, the 2018-19 levy was $53,120,215. Our tax-based growth factor is 0.2%. So we are, based on that brick and mortar change inside of our district, we could increase the 18-19 levy by $106,240. Pilot payments for 18-19 totaled $2,714,000. So if you look at that in comparison to a $75 million budget, that's a little bit more than 3%. So we're really, our pilot portion is a very minimal piece. A lot of things that are on the television now pertaining to the Northport Power Plant, where their pilot is almost 85% of their revenue. We aren't even close to that figure. The energy performance payment for the contract from 2007 is $444,000. From the energy performance contract for 2014, $642,000. So as those energy performance payments, the bond principal and interest, again, these are all related to the 18-19 year. So how the calculation starts with whatever you had as an exclusion for 18-19, you don't get to exclude that a second time. You have to factor that into the beginning portion of this calculation so that the taxpayers aren't compounded twice. The building aid offset here, you can't levy for capital debt as long as the state is giving you a building aid payment for it. So once we factor in our building aid offset, we went from a negative levy increase of 2.07%. We add back our building aid offset for 18-19, we're at 2.45%. Our allowable growth factor is not 2.44 because we are capped at, the tax cap is a 2% cap. Brings us to 4.507%. Our 2019-20 pilot payments are the same amount as 18-19. So once we factor in those pilot payments, we are down to a tax levy limit for 2019-20 before exclusions of 0.6020% negative. So we are starting our calculation out below zero. Any questions on what is not the most easiest thing to present on? We're good? Okay. So starting with that negative 0.6020% or negative $319,783, we're going to add to it what our 1920 exclusions are. We are adding back our contractual payment of $444,222 for the first EPC, adding back the $642,803 for the second EPC, add back the bond principal and interest that our amortization schedule tells us we have to pay for 1920. Right at this point, if we were allowed to stop here, the tax levy limit would be 6.6994% increase. However, since there is state aid coming back to us in the form of building aid, we now have to take out the $1.9 million that we anticipate receiving in 2019-20. We come up with an allowable tax levy with exclusions of 2.9640%. Now, it's really, really important, I think, to continually stress the tax cap isn't a 2% cap. It is the highest amount you're able to factor in is CPI or 2%, whichever is lower. So that's the only piece that is 2% inside of the tax cap. Everything else is a calculation. Any questions?
Just want to say, I think understanding my daughter's Eureka math might be a little bit easier than this, but
That's a.
I think I can get this. Thank you.
No worries.
Next up, the Prodell Middle School presentation, methods of inquiry and presentation.
Good evening. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you all tonight. The Methods of Inquiry and Presentation is a 7th grade course which meets every other day for the full year, usually opposite of art and home and careers. The initial design of the course was to provide students with an opportunity to become familiar with Microsoft Office Suite as it relates to research and creating multifaceted multimedia presentations. It really since has evolved into a much more robust technical and informational literacy program. The cooperation between our school librarian, Ms. Kalin, and teachers like Ms. Seneca has really transformed this course. Additionally, the one-to-one Chromebook initiative, along with the G Suite platform, has allowed so much innovation and almost limitless possibilities for this course. At this time, I'd like to invite or recognize students from Ms. Seneca's class to provide a brief overview of their experience. Ali Kahl, Alex Zhang, Catherine Winters, and Gavin Quinn.
We are students from Mrs. Seneca's MOIP class. MOIP stands for Methods of Inquiry and Presentation. In this class, we are learning how to research and present information in many ways.
Some of the highlights of MOIP include our use of the Google Classroom, G Suite, document sharing, and research tools, such as the virtual reference collection databases and library resources.
Thanks to the District Chromebook Initiative, all middle school students have their own Chromebooks, which helps us research in class. All of our assignments are posted to the Google Classroom, and we can get started in seconds. Having access to the virtual reference collection makes it easy for us to research accurate information and cite our sources. Learning in MOIP is unique. It doesn't have an exact curriculum like other classes, so we get to learn about topics that we normally wouldn't learn about. In September, we created a website on the country of our choice. We were able to select our country, research in the virtual reference collection, and upload pictures to a Google site. This is a lot of fun and gives a chance to make a website. You never know, I might end up as a web designer one day.
We had a chance to spend time coding in class since our curriculum is technology-based. We were able to create our own games and code in Block and JavaScript, which is not only cool to do, but could lead to a possible career one day. We are currently writing a global issue research paper and will present our research in a slideshow in the next quarter.
to work with other students on projects. It is a smaller class, so we get more attention from our teacher, and she helps us find information and use the library resources rather than Googling. She can also monitor all of our work through G Suite. I feel like I'm more prepared for high school, college, and I can even say a future career, because working with others on a project or research is important. Sometimes our teacher assigns us a group project where we have to complete a task in a certain period of time, find accurate information and reputable information, and cite our sources. Using G Suite makes it easy to share and collaborate with classmates on an assignment. We can all be working on editing a document together at the same time using our Chromebooks.
I know that whatever I choose to do in the future, research, writing, and finding accurate information is going to be part of my life. Learning how to correctly cite sources is also very important. I like how the virtual reference collection provides citations. I am also a member of the National History Club, so I know that finding different sources and citing them are a very important skill.
I feel that when I walk into MOIB with my Chromebook, assignment waiting for me in the Google Classroom, and my group ready to collaborate, I'm ahead of the game for my future. Thank you for giving me the chance to take this class, for the resources, and for my Chromebook. Thank you for allowing us to speak tonight.
Thank you very much. Cordell Middle School Student Government Report.
Thank you again. I'd just like to invite up a group of students who, under the leadership of Ms. Mons, do so much to enhance and improve our school culture and experience. I like to think these guys are future Brennan Gormans, because they're very involved and do a great job for the school. So I'd like to introduce Kayla Bodenberg, Courtney Green, Madison Zellen, and Matthew Trenelia. Thanks.
Good evening. I'm a member of Student Council. In September, we do welcome back assemblies and review and explain the dignity for all students act law. We review types of bullying, creating a hostile environment, and to report any incidences by being an upstander. Skits are performed on the types of bullying, and the students' audiences have to identify what type it is. We end with, it's important for our school to promote a positive environment so everyone can feel accepted and safe in school. We can make a difference if we all try.
In October, we do Red Ribbon Week to prevent tobacco, vaping, drugs, and alcohol. We have guest speakers come in, such as Police Officer Nancy and Dr. Andrew Clare. There's an advisory poster contest for each grade, and one advisory wins a prize. There's daily themes each day, such as Wear Red Day, Spirit Day, Scary Theme Day almost, Neon Day, and Wear a Hat Day.
From October to November is our Thanksgiving food drive. We have a food collection that goes to our very own SWR community and families that are in need of help. Any food that is left over is donated to our local food pantries, and all the turkey gift cards are donated by our very own middle school teachers and administrators.
In December, we provide a giving tree, Ugly Sweater Day, and SWR Pride video. We collect donated gifts from our students, teachers, and staffs who help our SWR families in need to have a wonderful holiday. Ugly Sweater Day is a very fun and way to get to learn to express your holiday spirit. Student Council took part in SWR Pride video. We share the good work we do as a club and as a school. In February, we do Spirit Week and Winter Wonderland dance. On Monday, we wear SWR Spirit clothes. On Tuesday, we do Tune Day with a friend or anybody in your school. On Wednesday, we do Crazy Hair Day or Hat Day. Thursday, Decades Day, and Friday, Pajama Day. Spirit Week is very fun. Student Council decorated and set up the Winter Wonderland dance, winter theme. All the student advisors made snowflakes to help us with decorations. And there was an open photo booth.
There's also more to come. We're thinking of doing another fundraiser, kindness bulletin boards, such as Think Before You Text. Posters will be made by Student Council. Morning announcements, such as daily kindness quotes. Throw kindness like confetti. Take one, share one, and write one down. Be the reason someone smiles today. Hashtag kindness, hashtag acceptance, hashtag humanity. And we every year do locker kindness post-it notes. We have advisories and kids and student council write notes on post-its and put them on every single locker for kids to walk into. And Mother's Day flower pens, student council will make.
On behalf of Student Council and Ms. Mons, we thank the members of our Board of Education and our administrators for your support.
I would just like to echo that sentiment of Ms. Mons. She's here tonight. I would just like to stand up, please, and be recognized. She's doing a great job. Kids are very excited to be part of that program. She brings such passion and excitement to the activities they bring to the school, and they're all such a positive, reinforcing activities. They really add a lot to the school culture and a lot to the environment. So thank you again.
Thank you.
Next up, instructional diagnostics, year 2, mid-year update. Mr. Meister.
Thank you, Mr. Lewis.
Just a quick question before we start. Should we hold questions to the end? Would that be easier?
Probably makes
Why are you
it.
looking at me?
Should we hold Aaron's questions to the end?
Aaron Chester. If there's questions, you should ask them.
Okay.
Where they fit.
I want to thank Aaron and Katie and Jim for providing questions in advance. I'm sure that'll be very helpful to communicate the responses during the presentation.
Thank you for this opportunity to present an update on our instructional diagnostics at this midpoint of our second year of implementation. Just as a way of some background here, we wanted to just be able to take a look at the information that we're using and how that information is tying into our students' performance and how we are supporting that work with our staff. Just a reminder, there was an extensive selection process that was involved in identifying and selecting these measures to begin with. One measure for math, which is our ALEX program, and another one for literacy, which is iReady for grades K through 8. And ALEX is grades 3 through 12 in math, and we use iReady for grades K through 2 in math. So why do we implement these tools? Assessing student progress is required for a school system to be able to grow. Supporting remedial student growth toward proficiency is one of our major missions. Supporting on or above grade level student performance and growth toward content mastery. Creating objective measures that inform where possible individual or growth gaps exist. And providing a means for gauging student performance against state and national student achievement levels. Providing an adaptive measure for measuring progress in students' math and reading is one of the key pieces that led us to selection of these two particular measures when we went through our selection process. By an adaptive measure, that basically tells you that each student gets their own unique series of questions when they take these measures that starts them with on-grade level questions and then adapts the difficulty of the question based on their responses to these questions.
So if a student starts with an on-grade level question, or just slightly below grade level question, and they're successful with those questions, the question level gets more and more difficult until the students reach a level where they're getting roughly half the questions correct. Same thing is true in reverse. If a student gets a series of questions incorrect, the questions will get progressively easier until the same goal is accomplished, where half the questions are able to be answered by the student, and that defines their level in an adaptive type of a measure. One of the things that's important about this is, besides the ability to measure where students are at along their growth trajectory, is the fact that both of these programs, Alex and I already have associated with them 24-hour access online to individually targeted instructional support, so that a student can go online and find lessons that will support their work based on where they are performing, regardless of where they are at in the regular classroom. So if a student is below grade level, the kinds of questions that they'll get support for online would be targeted to where they are at based on their prior performance, and then will help guide them up toward where they need to be. Same thing is true for students that are performing above grade level. They will then be able to do online work that is targeted to where they are at, which would be giving them opportunities to do advanced work. And so the type of support is adaptive just as much as the assessment measure itself is. Both of these measures provide an additional objective measure that supports our intervention and placement decisions. We're going to be talking about that quite a bit as this presentation goes on. I'm going to be inviting in just a little bit the directors to come up and talk to the reading and the math pieces specifically. Later on in the presentation, I'm also going to be inviting the building principals to come up to talk about exactly how they are seeing this work taking place in their buildings, how this information is being used to support decisions in the building and support professional development, give some feedback from where their teachers are seeing the programs used in their buildings, and then I will come back at the end of the presentation to provide an overview about the outcomes that we've seen and the next steps for where we're going based on how we're using this information. So how each of these two measures are being used to assess student progress differs. Before I do turn this over to the directors, just a little bit of a background on Alex and I. Alex measures student progress by looking at mastered standards. So it basically looks at each of the different grade level programs, the different standards that are contained in that course. So for example, if it's 4th grade math, it will have the 4th grade standards, and student progress is measured based on their mastery of the standards that make up those different areas of practice. iReady is a little bit different. iReady measures student performance as a measure of where their grade level performance is overall. So if I'm a student and I'm taking an iReady measure, it's going to give me a report that says that I'm either at the middle of grade 4 if I'm a 4th grader, high 4th grade, 5th grade. It gives you an actual grade level measure for where the student's performance is at, as opposed to, again, Alex, which gives you a percentage of standards mastered within that grade level. So just as a reminder, we have iReady in place for our students in grades K through 8 for reading and K through 2 for math. iReady reports student progress by identifying the grade level placement, as I just said before. For the mid-year diagnostic that we just had students complete, students would be considered to be at or above grade level if they receive an overall grade level placement of the mid-current grade level or better. So, for example, if I'm a 5th grader and I just took my mid-year diagnostic, I would be considered to be on or above grade level if I score mid-5th grade or higher. I would be considered to be approaching grade level if I was low 5th grade, or in the top third of 4th grade, which basically puts you 6 months of content at or above where you should be. And then anything more lower than that would be considered to be well below grade level. Those are designations that we use in order to be able to identify support service student placement considerations. And again, we're going to talk about that with our response intervention plan that was presented here and approved by the board at the end of last school year and is now in place. And the building principals will talk a little bit more about how they're using that data at their individual building levels to support decision-making processes for student placement in support services both in the classroom and out of the classroom. At this point, what I'm going to do now as we begin to take a look at the actual data from this is I'm going to turn this over to each of our two directors. I'm going to invite Ms. Waldbauer to come up first and to join us to go through, there you are, okay, to go through the iReady results for reading in grades K through 8, and then I will have Dr. Meyer come up here and she'll walk us through the iReady K2 math and then the ALEX 312 math and the data that goes with those.
Okay, thank you, Alan. So one piece of data that we have been looking closely at is, is how much growth we are seeing between the initial diagnostic that the students take in the fall and then the most current measure, which is in January. As you can see, the average growth from fall to winter from grades 1 through 8 was 13.5%, which is very respectable growth. You don't see the kindergartners there, just to make note, because they are assessed later in the year. So we don't have them included in the presentation because that data is not yet available. You also should note that on grade level indicates that students are in the 25th percentile or higher for work in their current grade level. And again, looking at the growth, it's pretty impressive from grade level to grade level.
Can I ask one of my questions now? This data is very impressive, and I think it points to the good work of our teachers, but have we compared it to the classroom data? Like if we're talking about reading the running records, is the same amount of growth portrayed in that data as well? Or is this an anomaly, or is this worse or better? How does it compare? Or has it not been compared?
Yes.
I'm going to jump in for the questions. But yes, what we have done, and we did this last year as well as this year, that's kind of why I'm jumping in, I have that piece of it. We've done a correlation study between performance on iReady and performance on running records, which is our other standardized measure that students take, their Teachers College benchmark assessments. And what we have found is that there is a direct correlation there. So students that are performing well on the iReady measures are also our strongest performing students on their running record measures. So that is one of the key measures that we use to be able to see how reflective this is. Is it a direct relationship where you're able to say a student is going to get this score on iReady if they get this level on their reading? It's not a direct relationship that way, but there is an incredibly high correlation with very few exceptions. If you have a student that is above grade level on iReady, they are generally at the highest level as far as their reading level. Most of the time, they're above grade level as well there.
And that also then is correlating to their report card grades.
There is a difference with the report cards in the way that the report cards measure student performance on a standard. So an iReady diagnostic measures students' overall performance across all 6 reading domains, whereas a running record assesses just one portion of their reading. So they're measuring different pieces of their reading progress. The report card actually breaks down each standard. And so it's almost, the report card standards are subsets. So there won't necessarily be an automatic connection between how a student's going to perform on a specific report card standard and how they perform overall on iReady, or even how they perform overall on their running record. If you look, what we did do is we created a posting of a articulation document that's on the district's website. Certain reading, certain literacy indicators, certain standards on the report card do directly correlate to a student's running record score. So that if they're not reading at grade level, they can't get a 3 or better on that standard. Because the standard is directly tied into, you have to be proficient on that standard, you have to be proficient in your reading level. But there are also certain standards that are not dependent on your reading level. So you can be proficient in a skill in reading without being on grade level overall.
So,
I know that that's a little wordy, but that's...
I know this isn't the original question that I had forwarded you, but in response to that, and in response to a lot of what I heard at where we were just at, is there a difference between the correlation between what's happening in the classroom and iReady at the lower grades, where it seems, in my experience, experience and what I've heard, that it may be more reliable than the upper grades. I know we got rid of it at the high school, but is there also a greater discrepancy at the middle school?
And the middle school is where we're actually currently really focusing our efforts, because while we have the TC running records in grades K through 5, where we have a second standardized measure to evaluate student progress that we can use as a bar to compare iReady results to, we don't currently have a second standardized measure of student literacy progress at the middle school.
There's only one Regents.
There's only one Regents, it's all the way up in 11th grade. And of course, the other standardized measure that is expected to be out there is the state assessments, which obviously we have a very low percentage of students participating in. So we are in the process of evaluating how do the iReady measures compare to both report card grades, which do have a subjective component in them, and other measures of student performance in literacy that we do have available to us.
Is there a common assessment in middle school in ELA?
Final exam assessments are looked at just like benchmark assessments, midterm and final exam or Regents, and of course assessments are not solid.
So we can't really tell yet because they haven't had final exams.
Right.
So moving along to the specific grade levels. So here in this report, we can see how students in grade 1 have performed in each of the 6 major reading content strands. Those that are listed are the comprehension for informational text and literature, for vocabulary, high frequency words, phonics, and phonological awareness. So we can see strong gains are evident across all of the 6 domains. The foundational reading skills are really where we've shown the strongest gains. And, this is to be definitely expected at the primary level where that is the focus. In comprehension and vocabulary, just under 50% of the students are at or above grade level, at this midpoint of the school year. But that's not too off base, again, because there is more of a focus on the foundational reading skills. So again, we will continue to work toward improving and supporting literacy development in those different domains. What we're really very proud of is the significant increase in the students performing at or above grade level in the high frequency words, because this was apparently an area where our students last year were a little bit lower. And with the implementation of the new foundations resources and some additional training, we're really starting to see gains in that area. I'm very excited about that. In grade 2, you can see, again, similar trends. We see a continuation of growth in all of the 6 literacy domains by our students. The students are moving more, again, toward mastery of those foundational reading skills. We're noticing more of the students at a higher level on those more advanced skill domains. Again, this is where our students are starting to turn into readers. And again, further advancing the percentage of students at or above grade level in phonics. That will definitely remain an area of focus, again, with the ongoing foundations work that we are doing in the district. In grade 3, again, we see this trend continuing. They're making gains across all of the domains. And again, at this point, mid-year, well above where they should be. The Words Their Way program, the new resources and training there, I think has really been making a nice impact in grades 3, 4, and 5. So you can see that making a difference as well. In grade 4, is one of those big shift years. You see the text become a lot more complex for the students. Again, you can see that most of our students are mastering the foundational skills. Those few that aren't are usually getting, we're looking further into what they need for perhaps RTI and intervention. But we really see, again, really great mastery here. in our students. And again, in grade 4, the higher, more advanced skills, the comprehension, the vocabulary, you know, that's where you see a little dip, but that's because they're now readers at this point and grappling with more complex texts. And now they're reading to learn rather than learning to read.
Can I ask a question, Ellen?
Sure.
So, when we talk about measuring proficiency with our students based on these tests, we're talking about some increases from fall to winter. We've seen that. But what are we doing for the students that are not performing at grade level? What have we implemented as far as academic support? What are they? How have we done that? Because it looks like, especially looking at the one graph, there's a huge dip between 3rd and 4th grade. So when you look at, this is the second year of this program being instituted, we should have, I would think at this point, sound programs in place or protocols to address especially that gap specifically.
Yeah, and as Ms. Waldauer was just indicating, the reason for that dip, and that is reflected not just here, it's a national, and we're going to show that in a little bit later on in the program, it's the structure of the test itself that changes from 3rd grade to 4th. And so if you actually just, if we go backwards just a little bit to this one right here, you can see in this slide, I know you may not be able to see in this slide.
I don't think we had those grade slides, did we? Did anyone else
We have this one.
Yeah.
The individual, for some reason, the individual grade slides we don't have. So, that's okay.
Sorry. We'll make sure that obviously you guys get the most updated version of this, and I apologize if you don't have that in front of you. But what you notice with this particular slide here is you'll see that there's steady growth in grades 1 to 2 to 3, and then we drop back down, and then they start to progress again, 4th and on. And the reason for that is because the actual structure of the test itself changes to become more rigorous and more difficult intentionally, because the shift that takes place when you enter grade 4 is that the questions on the iReady assessment shift to reflect the fact that students now are expected to be able to read more complex texts and to be able to apply those skills more in more complex reading passages. And so there is an anticipated drop. Now, in terms of answering the first part of your question, which was how do we use this information to help support students that may be performing below grade level expectations, the building principals are going to talk that a little bit more, but through our response intervention plan, the iReady data is used to help as one of the data points for being able to say if a student is performing more than 6 months below grade level in iReady, and they are performing more than 1 year below grade level on their running records performance, we're going to look at those kids and we're going to identify support services that are appropriate to help fix those gaps and close them by either a pull-out service, and those pull-outs happen now with the new structure that we created this year. We now have our RTI block so that at the Miller Avenue School, 30 minutes every day is allocated for either teachers to work with students that are near or on or above grade level, to work with them in small groups and in targeted interventions in the classroom setting, while students that are more than 6 months below, we look to pull those students out and provide them AIS support instruction with a reading specialist who works with them initially on an every other day basis for 30 minutes. At Wading River, it's the same system, but it's 45 minutes a day. And if those 30 minutes every other day or 45 minutes every other day aren't bringing about the kinds of gains that we're looking for and their results don't show improvement, then what we do is we look at moving those kids to 5 days a week of that pull-out support. The pull-out support is not iReady. I want to make sure that that's clear. iReady is a diagnostic that allows us to identify where students are performing at. It also provides an online support that a parent or a child can use at home to help supplement that. But the reading specialists have their own programs that they use, that they tailor to meeting the individual student's needs. That could be LLI, it could be targeted word work, okay? It can be Wilson. So that's at the discretion of the reading specialist who is trained and certified to identify students that are performing below grade level and target to them the appropriate level and type of service to bring them as quickly as possible back up to grade level.
And they can use this data to make that determination, right?
We use this data as a primary indicator
Yes, well, I know you.
of that. No,
I know we've talked about it, but I just
yeah.
wanted it to be said.
And again, one of the key parts is this is one of the indicators. We would never want to rely on just one measure of anything to be able to say this is the end all and be all. This is a solid, research-based, documented, standardized measure that's adaptive and allows it to be able to adjust to meet the students and really target where they're at. But it is a measure. We then combine that with running records and with teacher feedback based on work they're doing with students in reading and writing in the classroom. And all of that then gets combined together to make a recommendation of how can we best support this student. But I can tell you that the data that comes out of iReady and for Alex for math is critical in helping us inform those decisions and the types of support we want to provide.
Okay, and just to piggyback on what Alan is saying, what's amazing is that in, again, those foundational skills, we have more students who are meeting expectations and exceeding expectations than not. So as you can see, the grade levels go up. Grade 5, again, there's a continued focus on vocabulary and reading comprehension, skill building in grade 5, and you can see that we're just about where we need to be in the high frequency words, the phonics, the phonological awareness.
This was not a question sent in advance, so I apologize, but is this data also something that the district can then use? Like if we continue to see that vocabulary is very weak in grades 4 and 5 year after year, despite having fantastic teachers in 4th and 5th grade, and I know, Words Their Way and foundations are supportive of at least the bottom 3, and TC should really be covering the top 3, I would assume, but if there's a vocabulary gap, is the district looking at that and saying, is there something that our teachers, are we doing that?
Yes, yes. Well, again, with the Words Their Way training, we just recently got the newest resources and materials. We've had multiple training days
Is that
this year.
supportive of the vocabulary?
Yes, exactly, and the phonics. The digital resources have just come out, so we just got training in the digital resources. The students are going to have digital access soon. So we're continuing to build our bank of resources and also differentiate to where the students are, which old-fashioned vocabulary and spelling programs, they never were very differentiated. You just got a list of words and that was it, right, for everybody. We've chosen a program that really is very nice in the fact that it is differentiated to the levels of the students. So hopefully with more, with further training, the new resources being implemented, we're going to start to see, the gains in those areas. And again, the trend continues in 6th to 7th, and then to 8th. And by 8th grade, like I said before, you can see that 98, 99, 99, 100% of our students are where they need to be. That's, amazing, and that's why we don't have as great a need for that intervention at the middle school level. Again, this is mid-year data, so they're well above in a lot of these areas where they need to be, or just about where they need to be at the midpoint of the year. The next slide, I like this slide as well. It's similar to that first one we showed. You can almost, I wish I had my little pointer. Does this have a little red light? Oh yeah, it does. So you can see, if you kind of chunk it, you can see the trend from grades 1 through 3 going up, and then again, when that pivotal shift from 3rd into 4th grade, the standards become a lot more challenging. The text becomes a lot more challenging. They're reading across all content areas more and more independently, the expectations. But you can see, if you chunk it from 4th to 8th, also, very nice gains. So this is a comparison of grade level performance from year to year. That again, generally shows the similar results with slight increases, some decreases, but for the most part, again, focusing on the fact that this is winter comparisons, mid-year, if you look across the board, you know, we're way up there, both years, well beyond that 50% mark, and that's, you know, that shows very good results. Although most of the cohorts have made gains, it's difficult to compare cohorts and grades, as we mentioned before, because each year the standards are different. So that means each year the assessment is different, and it's an adaptive assessment. So, you know, you have to be careful when comparing the grade level to grade level and then the cohorts. So this is my final slide, and actually, again, very impressive results. The winter performance, the national comparison. So this is how our students did compared to the nation. At reading on or above grade level in grades should be 1 through 8. So you can see that our students are well above the national average. And you know, that's, again, a really testament to the strong programs we have, the teachers we have, the community, the parents who, you know, work with our students all the time. So we're consistently, you know, above the national averages. We are always working to make our programs stronger and to learn as much as we can, and you know, take this data and use it to make program decisions, and you know, that's a good thing. So it's been my pleasure to share this information and these results, and to be part of a team who works together to look at these results and to make programming decisions and professional development decisions together. The principals are going to talk about that piece a little bit later on. But before they do that, I wanted to introduce Dr. Meyer, if there are no other questions, to come up and talk a little bit about the math.
Sentence next. If you took this slide, and that's comparing us to the nation, how would it, if you didn't use iReady data, if you used the TC benchmarks, where our kids are on the running records as per their teacher, would it look the same? So based on our teachers who are giving our kids running records and saying, Alan, you're in 3rd grade and you're at a level J. I'll put you at an O, Alan, for 3rd grade.
I'm good with you.
But would it look the same? Is if we made this same graph, but instead of using iReady data, we used TC benchmark data, would it look the same?
I can't say that we've actually created that chart, but the other piece that goes with that is that I don't know if you've got national data available on teachers' college running records levels, because it's not necessarily a national, they don't collect their data that way, so there'd be no way for me to fairly compare it to that. What we could do, and what I've done in the past, but I haven't done it in a while, is to do a data analysis to see where our students' grade levels are, our running records reading levels are for our students, compared to where TC, from their research, TC has a chart that establishes where students are at that would represent above grade level, on grade level.
No, I'm not worried about that, because you have that, we have that. Their TC puts out a benchmark of where you're supposed to be. But I'm wondering about these blue lines here. If it's 3rd grade, do the report cards say 81% of our kids mid-year are at or above grade level?
On their running records?
Yeah, on their letter, on on their report card, they get a reading level.
I would have to actually, I haven't actually sat and worked out those numbers right now. It won't be as high as 81%, but I do believe it would be well over 50%. But where exactly that number is, I can get that number for you. We can work that out.
Again, you know, we're making these decisions based on not just the iReady, but the running records and the teachers, the classroom assessments. You know, so it's not just this one test that we're using to make a judgment on the report card.
Yeah, no, I know that it's, as Alan says all the time, it's just one measure. I've heard him say that to me at least 1,000,002 times. It's just one measure. I know that, but what I'm trying to
Maybe
get
that's why
at.
I'm up here tonight.
Because now you're saying it too. But what I'm trying to get at is, does it reflect what our teachers already know? Is it different from what our teachers already know? Is it if our teachers already know this about our kids, is it necessary to have this? And is it accurate? A lot of times, at least in my own experience or what I've heard, there are anomalies. And is it because of iReady? Is it because of a teacher? Is it because of what is the reason those anomalies are happening? So that's the only reason I'm asking these questions.
And it is difficult to make those kinds of connections, to say exactly where do you point that to say if it's an accurate measure. The thing that's most important about iReady is two things. One, it does correlate so that students that are above grade level on other measures that teachers commonly use are, for the most part, with a few exceptions. And when we do run into the exceptions, that actually sparks a discussion that says, why is there a difference between either up or down what they're doing in iReady and what they're doing in everything else? Those are few and far between, but they do happen, and we do use that as a teachable moment for ourselves. But in the other cases, it allows us to now be able to say, okay, we've got a measure that we can give in a single sitting 3 times a year that gives us a very quick and accurate, because we know it connects up and correlates with other measures, means of being able to say exactly where a student is at, that allows us to also generate a report that parents can now get that same snapshot and see that. But also, the really value in here is looking at those 6 domains as well. Because running records, like I said earlier, only gives you an insight into one piece of the literacy puzzle, their reading skill, whereas iReady breaks down all 6 domains. So it actually gives us information and a teacher information that says, where exactly should I focus the support for a student that's below where they should be? Not just to say that they're below where they should be, but do I need to focus on vocabulary for the student? Is it comprehension? Or is it one of the more foundational skills, whether it's the high-frequency words or the phonics? And that's where the real value lies, in that it does provide an additional piece of information that we can't get, at least not readily, from any of the other measures that we have available.
Yeah, and I will say that in my experience also, that because it does happen frequently and it is readily available, even with my own children, their course of intervention has changed because of iReady data. So I understand that, especially the 6 domains, how that is helpful. I just keep pushing at is it the same as everything else that we're using and what our paid professionals already know?
Right, and again, it enhances what they already know. We have very talented teachers. This was never brought on as something that we wanted to bring in because we felt that we weren't getting the job done. It was, how can we better gather information that we can use to target into both individual student needs and informing our programs as a whole. As you can see from some of the data, it does point out specific areas in our practice where we're going to want to now focus our attention, where we may have been aware of the fact that there were some concerns about an area, like let's say vocabulary. This really kind of gives it a title and a name and a number, which makes it easier for us to target into that.
Thank you very much.
I'd like to just start by thanking Mr. Rainster for putting this presentation together to share with our community. So shifting to math, these results again are iReady. We do iReady adaptive diagnostics in Miller Avenue, K through 2. Kindergarten wasn't available at the time that this presentation is available. They're just sort of finishing up. So this Miller Avenue iReady data is reflective of just our 1st and 2nd grade students. So 52% of Miller Avenue students are performing at or above grade level standards, with 45 approaching grade level standards and 3% well below grade level standards. This reflects a 5% increase in students at or above grade level as measured by the mid-year iReady math diagnostic. By way of comparison with the national, we have, again, a smaller range of grades that we're looking at, so we didn't create a slide. But the national percentage of students in these grade levels at or above grade level is 40 compared to our 52%. So we're seeing similar results in iReady and mathematics as we are in literacy. Moving forward to Alex. Alex is our 3 through 12 program. It was acquired to serve as both a diagnostic and support for students in mathematics. In addition to its use as an instructional diagnostic, it allows students to use the adaptive instruction available through the customizable Alex courses to continue to review course topics and standards throughout the school year in order to support building foundational skills and retention of mastery as the year progresses. So this is grade 3, and I'm sort of going to take them as a block, grades 3, 4, and 5. As mentioned earlier in Alex, measures student growth as a function of the percentage of standards mastered in the content standards in the given course. Here we are looking at grades 3, and I will show you 4 and 5 in a moment, comparing the percentage of standards mastered on the initial knowledge check in the fall with the percentage of standards mastered at the mid-year knowledge check. And you can see that student performance in all standards, whether those standards were covered or not, we are seeing significant increases. So a similar story in 4th grade.
So these super low numbers are because they hadn't covered those.
Those are content that, yes, so fractions and geometry and those sort of things that we're looking at 4th grade, it hasn't quite been covered yet. And the same story in 5th grade, those lower bars are spring content. We move forward to the secondary buildings, middle school. Student performance in those standards show steady increase as well. Similarly, in Algebra 1, Geometry, and Algebra 2, this is student performance in all standards, whether already covered or not. They do show those steady increases. And we also just wanted to highlight that June 2018, obviously the previous cohort, our Regents results are 95% passing and 22% mastery. So we're seeing similar, or we're seeing wider gains this year. We are seeing gains obviously across from fall to winter, and it is reflected in our traditional high passing and mastery rates across the district. For geometry, same story, again, June 2018 geometry, Regents results 85% passing, 16% mastery. And Algebra 2, 94% passing and 16% mastery. So while each of the charts just showed, illustrate the growth being seen across standards covered in each course thus far this year for all students, when looking at the increase in standards mastered for those students spending just 10 hours or more in ALEX since the start of the school year, 15% more standards are mastered to date than their peers. So this number, we are looking at a cohort of 823 students in the ALEX program. We have 91 students who either through course assignments or just on their own accord have spent more than 10 hours combined total in ALEX, and we are seeing for those students 15% more standards because they're participating in that adaptive intervention piece. It's completely customizable and individualized for the student's need in the course they're enrolled in. So the building administration, along with the directors, continue to collaborate with our faculty in the use of student data provided by iReady, ALEX, and a multitude of other data points. The use of these tools has been instrumental in helping to monitor and adjust program based on collective and individual student needs. One of the areas that I can speak to, since we have implemented a new elementary math program, is that we are monitoring our Eureka assessments as well as our iReady and ALEX results, and continually checking in to ensure that we are seeing consistent messages across all those data points, that the students who are typically scoring higher in ALEX and iReady are doing the same thing on the Eureka assessments, and so on and so forth. So it does help us to assess program initiatives such as Eureka.
In a second, I'm going to turn it over to the building principals to talk about exactly how this data is being used to inform what's going on in their buildings and some of the feedback that they're hearing from the teachers in their building. But before I do that, just really quickly, any questions that you have about the math piece or any of the data that we just took a look at now?
Let Nicole answer those questions.
asked most of the questions that I
Alan,
was anticipating.
I had a question. I heard you guys talked about how the standards change, so it's difficult to compare cohort to cohort. When those standards change logistically, how does ALEX work in terms of the subject matter that's being tested? So if the standards changing, are there annual updates to the ALEX platform?
The standards that change from grade level to grade level, the content strands in each grade level's course. So that's what's changing, but in a lot of so when you get to the secondary ALEX courses, well, when you get to the secondary math courses, they become content specific, so you have algebra, geometry, trigonometry, and algebra 2. Those are very different content strands within each of those courses. In the earlier grades, 3, 4, and 5, what you see more of a scaffolded math approach. So it's the same topics, but at more advanced levels as the content builds. So you start with adding and subtracting decimals, then you move on to multiplying and dividing decimals, and it's more scaffolded. What ALEX does is it creates, based on students' responses to the knowledge check questions, it identifies, based on where the questions are that the students are getting wrong, what type of foundational math skill work is needed to strengthen those more advanced skills. So if a student is struggling, for example, in 5th grade with multiplying and dividing decimals, and they go on to their pathway in ALEX, ALEX is going to identify the more basic skills that lead to mastery of multiplying and dividing decimals. And it may start them in an area of math that doesn't look like it has anything to do with multiplying and dividing decimals, because you have to have an understanding of fractions before you can start working with decimals. So it may start the student with fractions, or it may even start them below that if that's where the student level was struggling when they took their knowledge check. And so it's not a question of does it adapt students to what the content is in their current grade level. What it does is it finds the foundational questions that will connect eventually to where they're struggling at their current grade level. Does that make sense?
Thank you.
So the answer is no.
I'm going to give you a different point of view. So when we look at textbooks and do they align to what we're teaching at that moment, that's my analogy to ALEX. So occasionally we have to upgrade the textbooks.
Right.
So when we, just like we would do that with a hardbound textbook, how does ALEX adjust for that same approach?
It's a very different type of a system. I'm trying it because it's not as straightforward. I know what the answer is you're looking for, but it's not the way that ALEX works.
Okay. That's the
So
answer, then that's the
what
answer.
ALEX does is it looks at mathematics as a pathway of progressively more complex concepts that build from more simple foundational concepts. And so there is no need to adjust. There's a question of where do you place the child in that spectrum so that they can be met where they're at based on the kinds of questions they're answering right and wrong when they take the diagnostic. And it will then build that pathway. That pathway never changes because the strategy that's used to build more complex math is always the same. You always start with, if you understand this mathematical skill, then you're ready to go on to this mathematical skill. And then this one, and then this one.
So we don't need updates.
Because the system is, in a sense, intelligent enough to be able to use the diagnostic to say, this is where this child needs to start to get to where they need to be based on what they've demonstrated they already know. It also does the reverse, by the way, for more advanced math. So if a student is already demonstrating that they've got everything in 5th grade down pat, it's going to start challenging them with more complex and more rigorous examples. So it may go from challenging them with 2-digit by 2-digit multiplication of decimals to 3 or 4-digit by 4-digit multiplication because they've already mastered 2 by 2. And what we do have the ability to do in ALEX in rare cases, if a student masters all the standards in their course, first there's the ability for us to be able to open up more complex examples of the same content, but then we actually have in certain occasions where students have even mastered that, we can actually open up the next course to the student. So that's another piece of flexibility that ALEX offers us that we can use to differentiate and target student work, both above grade level and below.
Thank you.
I just have a question about the mastery percentages.
Sure.
Are we projecting those to go up now that we're using this tool to determine, you had like, it was very low, it was like 20.
Right.
Are we projecting that to increase now that we're using this tool?
Oh, sure. The way that this works is well, first off, these are broken down by the standards. There's also an overall performance that goes into the Alex Pie, which gives you all of the student performance for the course as a whole. A typical student will enter a given course at about 30% of the standards of that course mastered already when they first walk in the door, because it connects to previous work that they've done in courses that lead into the current course. So you would expect that the overall is about 30% standards mastered upon entry at the beginning of the year, the green bars.
I'm talking about the actual on the regions.
Oh, I'm sorry.
We anticipate that to grow now that we're utilizing this tool.
This as one of the tools for doing that, absolutely. But part of that comes to how much time is a child spending in their pathway. So again, if all that a student is doing is just taking the diagnostic, the knowledge check, the 3 times a year that we give it to them, and they're not doing anything else with this, then the only change is going to be is the normal change that happens through in-class instruction. Our hope would be that because, and you can see that in this, and we saw this last year as well. Last year, when I did this presentation in April, and we had more of the year behind us, we had more students that spent more than 10 hours in the system by that point in time. This difference was 25% higher for students that were 10 or more hours in the system. The hope is that students will be able to spend some time in their pathway independently. It's only 10 hours over the course of a year, but look at the difference that it makes, and then yes, because these are standards mastered, should translate into increased mastery on the Regents exam. That would be the goal.
Now, how is it changing instruction in the classroom if the results are potentially you have a 4-month gap, and you're measuring the proficiency of the students, and you have a curriculum you have to follow through for the year. How are you changing instruction in the classroom based on the results other than pull-out services? I mean, maybe the principals and the faculty can speak more to that, but I don't understand how this assessment dictates instruction in the classroom.
Well, this program was never meant to dictate instruction in the classroom. Let me start with
That's what you
that.
just said, right?
Sorry?
Didn't you just say that?
No.
Okay.
I said it informs instruction in the classroom because a teacher can take a look. Now, what you're looking at over here is the overall, all students taking Algebra 2, or all students taking grade 5 math. What a teacher is able to do is look at each individual student to see where their strengths are and where their weaknesses are by each of these separate domains. So I can look at one of my students in my class and see exactly where their individual strengths and weaknesses are across these domains. And I can use, for example, our RTI block to provide that student the opportunity to work on those areas where they're not performing as well as I believe they should be at this time of the year. But it doesn't mean that this is going to tell me how to do that. It's going to tell me where the gaps are. It's going to tell me by individual student. If I look at the data that I have available to me, I'll be able to see for each student in my class where their individual strengths and weaknesses lie. And it will allow me the opportunity now to have that information readily available that I can go in now and differentiate what I'm doing with them in the classroom. Now, I could do it by putting them on their pathway. That's one option that a teacher could do. They could take some of their RTI time and say, you know what, spend 15 minutes today of our 45-minute RTI block, pull out your Chromebook, work on the next unit in math in your pathway. That could be one option that a teacher might choose to use with the student if they feel that that's going to target into something that they feel they're weak in. Or they could turn around and give them small group working instruction in that area of their practice. So if they're weak in fractions, you might pull 3 students that are showing weakness in fractions, put them together, and pull them together with either a TA or with the teacher themselves, and work on building on their skill and their expertise and their mastery of fractions.
Are you talking about using this in the RTI block for the kids that are not being pulled out?
Correct.
Thank you.
Yeah, because the teacher that pulls them out is doing completely separate work. Students that are getting pulled out are doing foundational work in mathematics. Their mathematical skills are 1 year or more below. They clearly have a more foundational issue to deal with first before they can really
I just wanted to clarify
function.
that this was not being used in the pullout for
No.
the kids that are below.
Unless there's something specifically in here where the AIS teacher feels that that specific skill can be best supported by doing this. It's a tool that's in there, but for the most part, no. They're doing do the math in the pullout, for the most part, which is a separate program we have that targets specifically to students that are performing well below grade level.
And what percentage of our students are receiving those services?
It varies from about, I would say, what, 10 to 15%? We're looking at? Maybe closer to 20 on some of them. It varies because, again, it's not, we don't identify it by a percentage of a grade. We identify it by their performance on their assessment measures. It can vary anywhere from about 15 to 20% of a grade level are getting these types of supports, which is not atypical or historically different from what we've done. It's actually less than what we had in the past. Back in the days when we were looking at the standardized state assessments, before they changed them and before everything else with that, we would typically have 30% of every grade here performing below grade level and needing support. That was not unusual to be seen, where 70% of our students were proficient, 30% weren't. We're getting 1s and 2s on the state assessments. I believe that we are far ahead of that based on our region's results and how they wind up doing by the time they get to the secondary math level.
Can I, the same question that I asked Nicole about iReady and TC, I had the same question that I sent about Alex and iReady and Eureka. So Amy had mentioned it briefly that kids that are doing well on Alex and iReady and math are generally doing well on Eureka. But same way, how our parents and how our students and how our teachers understanding that where they are comparatively. And also, something that Amy said, Alex seems to, that has that pie chart, and when she showed all of the negative things, I have noticed that when looking at my child's report, some are so low. Is there anything that coordinates Eureka and Alex where I can know, well, I don't need to be worried that my child is only at 5% mastery mid-year because he hasn't been taught that yet? Like in a traditional math book, there would be chapter 1 through 10, and I'd know exactly what was being...
Right, we posted it?
So, Eureka parent tips, the topics are listed on those parent tip sheets that were recently posted to the website. So if you're looking at the correlation between the Alex Mastery Pie and the Eureka topics, you can just cite those parent resources and do that work. We can also...
Had the schedule on it? The schedule of what's being taught, when?
Yes. Yes, by topics. So it actually tells you the topic at the top of every parent tip sheet.
In the same language that's shown in Alex.
We could take a look at that and see if we could provide something that's a little bit more aligned using top language.
And toward that end, because obviously with Eureka being a first-year rollout, there are always going to be questions when you roll something new out as to how to make meaning of what you're seeing. We are going to be doing some parent workshops. I know that those email blasts just went out from both of the building principals. And the focus of those workshops is going to be the opportunity to go through those frequently asked questions and to address questions that parents may have on how do you interpret the rubrics, what is exactly, what content has been taught, what's going to be taught.
And how to compare it to Alex and iReady. I'm all for any program that supports kids and supports our teachers and gives us information to help our kids do better, but it becomes frustrating when the information doesn't seem to be consistent or is confusing or is overwhelming. And so if we have all of these tools, I'm just concerned that they're not all saying the same thing, or if they are, the language is so different that it's difficult to understand exactly how a child is doing. If you are a parent or a board member and you want to just make sure that we are doing the best for our kids, we have all of these different programs. Are they all saying the same thing? Are all of these programs necessary and the best to move our children forward? That's the intent of all of these questions and a little bit of my frustration.
Fully understood, and I am absolutely positive that if you're expressing those frustrations, you're not going to be the only one that's feeling that, and that's part of the reason why we're looking to provide these opportunities to kind of clarify. I will say that the standards are the standards. So in other words, what is covered in first grade, second grade, third grade, all the way through, is what the state includes in the standards that are required to be covered in each of those grade levels, K through 12. Each of the products that we have available, whether it's Alex, iReady, or Eureka, they're all aligned to those standards. So how they evaluate student progress along the standards, that's what's different. Eureka is a skills-based measure. So students are learning strategies along a spectrum toward mastery of strategies and application. So it's mathematical practices that are the driving force behind Eureka, which is why you have a rubric that's on a 1 to 4 scale that measures not a percentage of questions right,
Yeah, no,
but how far along.
I get it. I understand what the intention of Eureka. I support the programming. All I'm getting at is the connection between what our teachers are saying, what it seems evident our children are doing, and what these programs say, and are they aligned? Are they saying the same thing? When we're trying to help our kids grow, are these things helping us help our kids grow? That's all I want to ensure is happening.
And that was a key piece of the process we went through in identifying Eureka, was how well does it provide our students with the skills necessary and the ability to translate those skills into practical application. And I will say, and then the principals are going to talk about it, well, they're going to really focus tonight on iReady and Alex, but I can assure you that the similar conversations are taking place with regard to Eureka. While taking on any new project is daunting and there is a lot of work that needs to be done, I can tell you that I have heard from quite a number of the teachers on the staff that they are seeing remarkable gains by students this year in their understanding of mathematical concepts.
And the only reason I even brought up Eureka was the same reason I brought up TC, was because I want to make sure these diagnostics match that program. That's all. I'm not asking you to defend Eureka.
No, absolutely.
We have parent workshops for that.
And in the most fundamental sense, yes. In that students that are performing the lowest on their Eureka assessments are also the students that have the lowest scores coming out of iReady or Alex, and vice versa for the high scores.
I had 2 questions.
Sure.
Just saved them,
No.
but and a couple of my questions were answered. But the question I gave you earlier, as far as how these benchmarks are informing instruction, my concern, and the reason I asked that question, is with our increased vigilance in analyzing data. I feel that we have, at the younger grade levels, almost shifted our focus in a way in trying to make these numbers reach higher. Can it actually inform instruction, not just because of the timeline, but also because of the state standards being so, I just feel like our teachers don't have time to even do this, to change their instruction, to be fluid in the way that they, maybe we have the RTI block, but how is this actually informing instruction, and is it putting undue pressure on teachers to focus more on data and less on, just how content our children are in the classroom, and are they grasping concepts in a way that they feel proud of themselves. And then similarly for the older students, I just feel like we have enough tests. We don't need to use this as an additional benchmark because we have enough throughout the year. So I have been trying to be open to this whole thing. Alex and iReady, I voiced my I don't agree with continuing to move forward with this. I feel like we are becoming a little bit too concerned with the individual data points and losing the whole child. But I'm trying to hear all of it.
Right. And actually, I think that the best way to actually address a lot of what you just asked is I'm going to actually turn it over to each of the building principals, because a lot of what you asked for is actually what they have come prepared to speak to, and that is how this is actually being seen as impacting in their buildings in terms of driving all of the things that you just spoke to. You had a second question, or do you want to hold off on that one?
I wanted to know how it's informing placement and services, particularly the numbers at the end of the year. Like, are we using every bit of the data from the time, you know, the student is completed with the last iReady, the last Alex? How is it then contributing to the placement piece of it for the following year?
The way in which it's used, and that's going to be part of what the principals are going after, but we do keep track of all of that. It's all tracked for every single individual student, and every single student is looked at the end of the year to determine what the best support structure might be for them as far as services are concerned. Placement in terms of, I'm not sure what you mean by placement. Are you talking about just a support service placement, or?
For support service placement, but also when we look at report cards, when we look at the whole child, where they would best fit in terms of their classroom placement.
Classroom placement is always based on a holistic look at the student that includes their academic performance, as well as behavioral performance, SEL, and all of the other factors. And teacher recommendation as well. So it is included in that as a factor, because if they're high performing in reading or math, and we've determined that by these measures, then that does play a role in how we distribute the students for which teachers they would be, which classrooms they're going to be in for the following year. Again, I'm going to turn that over really, because those are kinds of questions that the building principals could very easily field. So I'm going to actually start by turning it over to Ms. Carlson.
So I'll just talk about the placement really quick. There's like so many things that go into placement, and iReady is just one of them. So between behavior, reading level, math level, gender, services. So iReady is like one of probably about 24 things that we look at when we're deciding where a kid's going to go the following year. So we do look at it, but we look at like so many other things. So one of the things that has helped me try to make the most use out of iReady data is I look at it as I compare it to when we take our kids to the doctor for their annual checkup. And you know that little chart you get with like height and weight? And you just want to make sure that your child is moving up the chart in height and weight. That's kind of how I look at iReady. So I'm looking to see, are my students moving up the continuum the way they're supposed to be moving up the continuum. So if you look at the iReady placement results, one of the things I can tell you that the teachers and I have struggled with is the numbers are very hard to put into perspective. So if you look at what a student's results might be, it might be like 402. Like, I don't know is that a good number or not a good number. So what we've really been looking at is, one, where is that in the national percentile? And is it better than they were doing last time? So my philosophy has always been, I don't really care where a kid started, I really care where they're going. So we look at it to see if they're growing. If they're not growing, that's one thing that kind of sets a red flag for us. The other thing that we do is we look at the results for the entire grade level, from the highest performing to the lowest performing, and we actually go down to the bottom and we look up, and we look at those students who are performing really low on the grade level, and we try to make sure that all of those students are being addressed in some way. So normally, and like we've heard a lot of people say, it does correlate to what we already know. So usually the kids who are performing at the bottom of the grade level are kids who are already receiving service, already maybe are classified special education students, are E&L students, kids who we already know are identified. The kids that we get to where they haven't been identified yet, those are the kids that we go, oh, what's going on with this kid? And we're able to identify kids who maybe we missed in our regular performance within the classroom. So historically what we found is a lot of times kids who are identified as in need of remedial services, sometimes when we put them into the remedial group, they don't actually need remedial services, they just needed some kind of a behavior intervention. So for example, we've had quite a few kids who are just can't pay attention, so they're not performing in class the way that they should be because they're kind of all over the place, and we identify them as being in need of service, but when the service provider starts to work with them, we realize, like, no, they really know their stuff, they're just not performing in class. So we've identified a couple of those kids. And then the opposite, we have those kids who are diligent and they work so hard and they do everything the teacher asks them to do. And they're never a problem and they do all their homework. But then all of a sudden we notice on iReady, like, oh my gosh, they're still at the bottom, what's going on? Somehow they're not, they're not rising to the level where a teacher is identifying them to need service. So that's another place where we've identified them. The other thing is, what I like about this program is that our benchmarks that we use for running records and even with the Eureka assessments all happen at different times. So traditionally, we were only looking at data at the end of every trimester, which is like every 15 weeks. So that's a very, very long time, especially for little people. So 5, 6, and 7-year-olds, 15 weeks is forever. So now we're able to look at, by the time we finish the iReady in the fall, it's like October. Then we get another set of data in November, which is like the end of the benchmark assessments. Then we get another one in January. Then we get another one in March. So it's actually giving us data at different times. So even though it correlates, it's data at different times. Does that make sense? And the other thing is that we're also finding that because our cohorts are very small, it's actually nice to be able to be compared to a national average. So, we do have some small cohorts, like 114 kids. So you might be the highest of the 114 kids, but are you really that high if we were going to compare you nationally? And sometimes we lose perspective because those are the only kids we're seeing. So it kind of allows us to say, maybe even for our higher kids, what we're saying is like, I know we thought this kid was really, really high, but they're not as high as we thought. And how can we push those kids so that they're achieving more?
In your building, are the support services also differentiated based on these
Yes,
results?
so the support services are differentiated based on the results, but not just these results. So they're also differentiated based on the running records, the foundation scores, and the Eureka assessment. So it's not, and based even on, in the math program, the Do the Math actually has an intake assessment that determines where a child would do the best with the remediation. So it's based on a bunch of different things, not just on one thing.
I guess the question that has been asked yet is how heavily are these scores weighted when determining?
They're not weighted any more heavily or less heavily than anything else. So one of the things that we really believe in is looking at not just one piece of data. We look at all of the pieces of data, and then we look at also the child. Right, so they're not one is not really more heavily weighted than the other. It kind of depends on the situation. So what I could say is, so for example, we might have a student who comes up performing very low on iReady, but then we look at the running record and we look at the foundation scores and we talk to the teacher and they say, no, that's not true. Everything else is fine. So we don't do anything about it. But then on the other hand, we might have a kid who is not doing well on everything else, but doing well on iReady. We're not going to put that much weight into it. They're all kind of equal. Does that make sense?
To a certain extent, but I would still have concerns if we're not doing anything about it. If they have issues taking standardized tests.
Well,
we have a very high opt-out rate in this district, so.
And I should say, and I don't know, and I'm going to speak because I have little people, 5, 6, and 7. So sometimes what we find is some of our kids are not very savvy at using technology, right? So I put a little bit less weight as I get to know them. So what we found is our second graders, obviously a little bit more savvy at technology. If it's a kindergartner and the teacher says I know for a fact, we have kids who never use technology. We have kids who have never used a computer or a screen. That's going to weigh a little bit differently, right, than a kid who I know, like my kids, my third kid used technology from the time she could hold something, you know what I mean?
Like my daughter who talks to Google.
Right.
That's full of conversation.
So that's something we take into account. It really depends. And we also know, we've put things into place where teachers can take into account, was it a bad day? Did you have a kid who just got sick? Or a kid who was on vacation, or a kid who just came back. And again, going back to the analogy of when you look at the height and weight chart, You know, maybe your kid's weight is higher than it's supposed to be, but you know that, you know, it was the day after like some big birthday party and they, you know, ate too much. I mean, so we take all of that into account. Like we have a few kids, I'll be honest, who when we looked at, because we're just finishing the kindergarten stuff, we have a couple kindergartners who didn't perform where we thought they would perform, and we found out they were on vacation for a week. So for a 5-year-old to miss a week of school and then come back, they didn't perform as well as we thought they would, but now we're saying like, okay, they were away for a week, that's why they're not performing as well.
Last question. So maybe it's, I mean, it might be on a building basis. But how is this information, once it's collected, disseminated to the faculty? And then how are they taking that information, turning it around? And what time are they being given to tailor instruction?
So every faculty member has an account, and in your account, you see all of your kids. So it's like a roster, and it has your student, the names of all your children, and then their scores in each domain. When you click on each child, you can kind of dig deeper and deeper and deeper into where you can help them, what their strengths are and what their weaknesses are. So I know in my building, I don't know about Wading River, but we designated an entire faculty meeting to ELA results and another faculty meeting to math results. And we kind of did it as a group together where we were able to, like Dr. Meyer and Ms. Wallbauer were there, and our math coach and our literacy coach and me, and we kind of all sat together and looked through all the data and had an opportunity to kind of talk to each other. And again, kind of bounce off of your colleagues, like, hey, what are you seeing in your class? Because they don't have the perspective that I have of the whole building. They only have the perspective of their class. Any other questions?
All right, Mr. Paranella? All right. Well, you know, Mrs. Carlson said everything. I'm done. You have any questions? It's very similar, but I will add, you know, the height-weight chart is an excellent analogy. You know, taking the pulse of children is just one way. You know those new oxygen sensors that they came out with that you could put on your finger and then you could tell what your oxygen levels are? And they're like so cool, and you can get them at CVS or Walgreens or anything like that. It's just another tool in the toolkit, and that's what we're using this for. And I know there could be concerns like, oh, is this going to be just test-driven and we're just going to use this as the only measure? No, we're not doing that, because we could spend all day just doing test prep and we could get these numbers up artificially high, but that's not what we're doing. And actually, one of the teachers, I'm sitting over there, I'm like, well, if we did test prep ahead of time, you know, the kids' scores would be higher, but that's not what we do. That's not what it's about. It's about the whole child. So it's helping raise the level of
But at the same time,
instruction
like
achievement.
just hearing that a faculty meeting is, like, how many faculty meetings do we have? So a faculty meeting is being used to disseminate data, identify numbers. Like I just as a parent, what I'm hearing, and I know this is not completely true, but emotionally, what I'm hearing is my child is being reduced to data, and instead of using those precious faculty minute moments that don't exist very many times throughout the year to talk to your colleagues and hear from your leadership new ways to make kids excited about learning, we're analyzing numbers. I'm just not okay with it. I don't.
All right. I don't know that I'll be able to convince you one way or the other. I just want to look, is that what we're doing? And that's that. So, I mean, it's an overall pulse, but the diagnostic is helpful on my level and on teachers' levels that are using it. And I've had different teachers come up to me and say, you know, this one really needs help in this area, let's say a reading teacher or a math AIS teacher, and say, well, I really want to focus on this or that, or a classroom teacher, it could be the same thing. And for the RTI process, it really helps inform us. And you say, you know, reducing kids' data, that can't happen. It's just another way. We do take a look longitudinally of children, you know, K through, and I know we're coordinating with the middle school as well, where we take a look at the students running records, at their anecdotal information, and their, let's say, their scores on their end of module assessments, on the ALEX assessments, on the, let's say, might be conferencing or anything like that, exit tickets. But we do maintain a really comprehensive, longitudinal look at data to just see if we're missing anything, to see if anything pops out. And it's been great with Kevin Van over at the middle school. That's something that's new that we're really helping coordinate back and forth. That starts out right with Mrs. Carlson's building, and we're going on. And to say that if we see something that's a little blip on our level, it's a little different. We might not ignore it as quickly if we do see a discrepancy. We'll really talk to the teachers. If we see let's say they're doing really high in class and do really poor on assessment, we might really sit down and really take a look at what's going on. The teacher's insight is so valuable in that. And that's really one of the most important factors that at least we take into account. If a teacher's saying, look, they're doing all this, they just had a bad hair day or just, had a really bad testing day. You get it. And sometimes the older kids might get a little bored of sitting down at the computer and taking a test. And we're not, in the 4th grade level when it gets really difficult for those assessments, we're not spending weeks ahead of time or days or minutes ahead of time doing test prep for a iReady test or an ALEX test. That's not our philosophy. That's, hey, look, this is a test, you sit down, you take it, a little diagnostic, and it gives us some insight into where you're doing. Let's just see, what else did I want to share with you?
Is there any professional development or support that's still ongoing for the faculty? Can you talk a little bit about that? Like how are we making what we have or started with better at this point? And I go back to my old analogy of, I had a piece of software that I was using initially, and there's updates that happen occasionally. So I'm wondering, is there a little bit of that in terms of trying to continue this going?
I'll start out with iReady. We've had the iReady staff developer come in and present to the staff. We did that last year. We had her again this year. We'll have her again next year. We'll provide some really nice insights. We did have a faculty meeting where she didn't come, so we could look at the data ourselves, take a look, and kind of reflect similar to what they did at Miller Avenue as well. So yeah, that has to be ongoing. ALEX is a little bit of a different look at that, and we're trying to get our head around how we can use that to help our kids on upper levels and also for support. So yeah, and just like the kids are learning all the time, to be honest with you, I'm learning all the time on this, and us and my staff, we're learning all the time as well.
Are you getting the support you need?
So far, anything I've asked for when it comes to ALEX or iReady, I usually get a response right away. It's pretty amazing with iReady especially. I mean, you go direct and they are right there for you. And
Yeah, I mean with them, not so much our,
our
internally, but
it's
from
right here, but with them. ALEX, it's a little different.
Is Alan no?
No. I mean, that goes without saying. It's when we're doing presentations, the director's there, Alan's behind the scenes supporting, or there in person supporting. You're at one of the faculty meetings, actually, right there. When we have one. So, but ALEX is sort of different. We're learning how to use that a little bit more. It's not like it's directly supported where we have, iReady. The person is like right there in the building, but it's what we need for what we're using it for right now. I feel supported. If my teachers need any extra assistance, you're welcome to let me know if there's anyone in the audience or anything like that. We're just here to help support our
There's
kids.
anyone in the audience?
There's
Carlo
one up there.
Roberts.
If you need extra support, we're just trying to figure out how to make it fit for our kids. We don't want to make our programs fit ALEX or iReady. We want them to help just use what they're giving us to help support our kids.
And I have to say that I've had, and Alan knows, that I've had a tremendous amount of skepticism about this, because I have two children that are on, one is slightly ahead of the curve and one is slightly below the curve, and the data can be very difficult and frustrating based on what I'm getting from the classroom, what I'm getting from this, and there's a little bit of confusion, and maybe it's me, it's the user, I don't know. But what has happened on every level with both of my children is that you especially, in those meetings where you're trying to do what's best for your child, you have always, and your staff have always made sure that it is really about the child and their whole self and what they are doing. So I've never, I am not trying to defend either of these programs, but I am saying that it has certainly been a piece, and it has been informative and helpful to both of my children, and it's never been, your child is this, and that's all we're going on. You have done an excellent job of making sure, and your staff, that they know the child as a human, not a child. So I in my own experience, and I appreciate that tremendously, because it has been very difficult.
Any other questions?
I have just more of a statement. So, Aaron's point, yes, I agree. As far as the whole child concept in the buildings, I think when you look at, as it being one measure, I think part of the skepticism from myself, and I will go on record say I opt my kids out of all these tests, is that I've never been in a teacher's conference about the performance of my children, and it ever been brought up that the teacher finds value in having these results for my children. This is speaking for me. So part of it would be helpful if I was in a meeting with my teacher at a mid-year point or at the beginning of the year, and they said, listen, we really appreciate, because it helps us to inform instruction for your child if you have them take these tests. And I've never had that happen. So as much as everybody says that this helps, it's never been verbally addressed to me personally by any of the teachers that my children have had. So I guess from a community standpoint, that can certainly increase skepticism about taking these tests if the teachers are not vocally supporting it.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. It's new tools for everyone, including the teachers. So, point well taken. Point well taken. So.
You're off the hook.
But I can say that just to leave on a note like what Son was saying, it's just one way of looking at a child, and it is never. And I've said this in my faculty meetings, and I'll say it publicly. It's not something that's ever used in a way like, oh, we're doing this or not doing that. It's like general trends. How are we going to help make what we're doing better? How are we going to help all of our children so no one falls through the cracks or anything like that? How are we making sure that we're if we have 114 kids in a grade, how do we compare, to other kids across the country, and are we really doing as well as we hope we are? And it looks like we're making some really nice gains. We just want to continue that, continue to build on what's best. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hello again. They really, Lou and Christine really cover a lot of the information, a lot of the material. I think what I agree with Christine about is one of the real benefits for me, looking at it holistically, is, and I'm going to agree with you in the sense that, a lot of the results we see, we kind of know already. Like, it's confirmed. The kids who are excelling, we know they're going to be near the top. Kids who may be struggling, maybe a little bit near the bottom. But it's the kids that you might miss in the middle. So I find a lot of value in these screeners in that regard, and really looking for the outliers, who are the kids whose grades, and it is a little different for us because we're looking at numeric grades now in the middle school. So a kid who's maybe got a 92 or 93 average in a class, but scoring poorly on one of those on the screeners, that's a little cause for concern or cause for further investigation. So I really do find value in it in that regard. And another thing, just to jump ahead, is the teachers really find value with it in the conversations that I have in looking at trends holistically. So I have I'm not going to go through them, but they all gave me some statements on what they find valuable and what they struggle with as far as the iReady and Alex is concerned. And across the board, the 7th and 8th grade teachers note the trends in the lower scores in the element of vocabulary. So we've had department meetings, we've worked with Nicole to come up with some innovative ways to teach vocabulary, because we see that as a trend. That's something that that jumps out at us, where we're below where we are on the other elements. So this is something maybe collectively we'll talk about at department meetings and come up with different approaches and different instructional strategies for that. So I think that's really beneficial. And interestingly enough, and then you look at the 6th grader, the 6th grade teachers all focused about on reading. Some teachers use it to put reading groups together. Some teachers use it for, I forget exactly how she described it, book clubs, grouping book clubs together, reading partnerships. Some other ones use it to specifically target and develop individual homework plans for students based on that data. So these are all really good things, I think, that come out of it, which really personalize the educational experience for students. I understand the reservations about it too. I understand both sides of it, I really do. But as a parent, and I look at it a little differently, my kids are a little older now, and I reflect back, and I think to myself, well, here's a tool that I can get some additional information about how my child is doing, and maybe I could support them at home with a lot of the, the Alex and the iReady aspects. That would make me happy as a parent.
As long as it's
another
an
resource.
accurate representation.
What's that?
As long as it's an accurate representation.
Fair, and I would make that judgment based comparing that to their report cards and whatnot too, is what I see all together, if I look at the whole picture. So I get that, I understand that completely. So that's kind of how we look at it. I think the biggest benefit for us here at the middle school is looking at those trends across grade levels and using that to force us some conversation during department meetings and to looking at different ways to approach things. And it's very similar for Alex as well, particularly looking at how they craft their cumulative reviews, so they can look back on the Alex information, and if they see that one of the topics is something that they had covered already, where kids maybe aren't doing well or as well as they would have hoped based on the Alex, when they do those cumulative reviews, maybe they'll put a little more emphasis on something that the kids were struggling with, what they had covered already. So it informs them and ways to adjust their overall assessments and kind of go back and reteach when those opportunities do come up. So that's pretty much it for me. If you guys have any questions.
Normally you get the short end of the stick going after them because you have to go after little kids and they're so cute, but this time all the questions
Well, their students
have
aren't
been
here that
answered.
time, so it's another story now. It's just little.
No, this is how you do it. As I trip down the steps. At the thanks, Kevin. At the high school, it's a completely different animal than what we've heard coming up through the elementary schools and the middle schools, because we're really just using Alex within a few of our math courses. So instead of looking for kind of an overall trend, we reached out directly to the teachers who are using the programs and asked for their feedback. So these are some of the comments that we got from the individual teachers. One said, I believe Alex can be very beneficial to the students. It provides the students exposure to adaptive software, which has been becoming a more progressive means of standardized assessments in many realms of academia. Most of our college entrance exams are using these types of programs, so it's giving our students those experiences before they actually get to that point. Same teacher also said that the Alex program provides students an additional means of driving themselves to push towards a greater understanding of the course, and gave some feedback outside of their class grade on how they were doing overall, so that instant feedback becomes a theme.
What courses specifically? It sounded like you said you were trying to
Right. We're using it on our geometry, our algebra 1, our algebra 2. Am I understanding where?
Pre-calculus, college math.
And pre-calculus and college math.
Majority of them.
Yeah. The same teacher also said they appreciate the questions are based on the individual needs of the students. So again, it's tailored. Different teachers said, I feel that the content covered in Alex not always being in lockstep with the course content is a strength of the program. They felt this way because it allows students to work simultaneously on topics that they have already seen, or in some cases they have not yet seen, while also working on a different skill topic in class. So it's expanding the way they think and seeing connections between some of the topics. Alex forces students to review prior knowledge they did not fully understand. They feel that Alex, the weekly assignments are helping students retain skills and concepts. And finally, a teacher indicated they like the feedback they get from the program, and they also like the fact that it helps their support staff, in this case specifically a TA, who has access to the program, so that they are also keeping up with the material, better enabling them to work with their students. So we're seeing at the high school a different kind of feedback because we're at a different stage. We're not talking about getting kids through their foundational skills, we're talking about getting kids prepared for what's coming next. So any questions for the high school part of this?
What is the student feedback?
Student feedback is mixed, to be honest. There are students who are taking it very seriously, and there are students who are figuring out whatever way to get through it as quickly as possible. For those students that are taking it seriously, they are getting real benefits from it because they're pushing themselves. And these types of programs reward the kids who put the most time into them. If you're sitting down, if you're taking this seriously, if you're really trying, and you're really putting in the effort week after week, you're going to see tremendous gains. For those that are just simply, checking off a box, then they're getting out of it what they're putting into it.
How do we present this to students in terms of, I just keep going back to if our students feel that what is being presented to them is purposeful, then they will invest themselves in it, whether they're a kindergartner or a senior. And so how is it presented at the high school level as something purposeful for them?
Sure, the teachers are presenting it as another tool, as a way of seeing the material outside of just the way it's being presented in class. So many of these students are used to processing information in this format now. They're seeing it online. They're seeing it in the form of questions. They're seeing it in the form of repetitive questioning. So the way the teachers are putting it out there is that, listen, if you want to improve, if you want to get better at this, this is a great way of enhancing what we're doing in class. So that's how they're putting it out to them. It's literally something that if they want to put the time and the energy into, they are going to see results from it.
So if the point of this, up until your building, is to have an additional data point, but that's not necessarily the point in your building because you have so many common assessments, and so this is just one more tool that teachers can use to support their kids, but I can't imagine it's the only tool, or...
Not by no means.
Right, because even in a K-2 building, there's like 37 different websites and sign-ins kids have. There's every resource available, so I'm sure at the high school, it's the same thing. So is it necessary, and is it being used?
I believe it is being used. I believe it's being used effectively by those students who are choosing to.
And we don't know, you don't know how many students that is, or who is choosing to use this?
No, because you ask any student at any given time, it all depends on the answer that they give you. There's no way for us to truly be able to look at a kid's profile and say, they're putting full effort into this and another kid is not. That's really a difficult question to be able to answer.
I'm going to go through the remainder of this relatively quickly. The only piece, and I know that this is one of the questions that was posed, I know that there was a question about how much time is actually spent by students completing these assessments. It amounts to 6 hours in the school year. It is roughly 1 hour per diagnostic. There are 3 each in math and in reading, and there's your 6 hours. Looking at that from a whole perspective of the year, that is what the amount of time is that's actually used in providing the assessments to be able to get this information that we use for our students. That's where both of them are given. At the high school, it's only 3 hours per year because they only do the math. Some of the key findings, put up with this really quickly. There we go. We have seen significant growth evident between student performance on their initial diagnostic and their mid-year diagnostic. We went through all the data that backs that up. The principals, as you've just heard, have shared that the data from these diagnostics is informing our dialogue. You heard very specific examples to that of what's working and where we need strength and strategies that we might want to investigate in conversations with teachers on how to do that. Increased use by students of the adaptive instructional components results in significant increases in their performance and growth. As we said earlier on, you see about a 15% difference in the standards mastered by students that are just spending 10 or more hours in ALEKS. And so that is something, obviously, as Ms. Pugliese just said, though, that is a choice that students have to make. We did see from the data that was in there, 91 students that we have, which is not an insignificant number, so far this year have spent 10 or more hours in the system and have seen those significant gains because of that time spent.
In ALEKS or iReady or both?
That's ALEKS. iReady doesn't have a way of tracking their time in the system. It doesn't work that way. We can check to see how many modules they completed in iReady. The user reports are available, but it doesn't have. ALEKS is specifically designed to be able to connect, correlate time on task to a percentage of student standards mastered. And we do have a clear correlation that exists between student performance on ALEKS and iReady and their general performance in other measures that we do have. From this, and you did hear some of this conversation through each of the building principals and from Amy and from Nicole, that the areas where we see academic program support could be beneficial is vocabulary and reading comprehension with regard to literacy. Fractions and multiplying and dividing decimals is where it shows up as being areas where we would want to focus some of our attention in the math. Using this data to drive growth, that is one of the two key components of the data. The other one, of course, is to individualize instruction and to use it on a student-by-student basis, but looking at data to drive growth on a program level, based on the data that we saw in iReady and ALEX, that has led to work that we've already been doing, starting from the data we had last year and continuing into this year, to support professional development in foundations and Words Their Way. We've brought in learning walks where our team of administrators are able to go into classrooms looking to target areas of focus. Those areas of focus are informed by this type of data telling us where we might want to look and focus that effort. Do the Math was brought in to help target the students in mathematics. We have our TC program. Patterns of Power is a program that we just brought in to help support grammar at the elementary level. And Eureka Math, as we already know, is in place. Ongoing work is to create materials and provide instructional resources that help advanced elementary students. An area that we are increasing our efforts on is how do we go ahead and use this information to say, these are students that we would want to make sure we're pushing further because they demonstrated strong aptitude in reading and math. Optimizing student learning opportunities during our extra help enrichment periods and also the RTI block at the elementary level, and building our teachers' capacity for optimal use of these available resources to help them differentiate instruction through our professional development, and going through opportunities for them to collaborate with each other on how best to make use of the new times that we have available for them at the elementary level, and also how we might support students at the secondary level using this data. Maintaining access to iReady online instructional support through the summer. That was something that we were able to do for most of the summer last year until we ran into a little bit of a glitch, but we are working on that. iReady online instructional support should be available to students and parents that are interested in that through this summer. We're looking to also extend that availability and access to parents that would like to be able to use that tool to support student work in the summer in ALEX as well. We are using data from all assessment measures to further refine and strengthen our process for academic support for our students, especially the at-risk students. And using this data is also, by the way, part of our IEP process. So a Committee for Special Education, this is one of the pieces of data that is used to help support what the best support services and modifications might be for students. I would definitely be remiss if I did not take a moment here at the end of this presentation to thank all of our administrative team, the building principals that you heard from tonight, their diligence and their work with this data and helping support teachers with using it in their classrooms in effective ways to help students. And I would really be remiss if I did not take a specific moment to thank Kathy Lang, who has been just absolutely phenomenal in helping break down this data and making it so that it's easy for us to be able to share that information with our staffs. Everybody is on the same team here. Our goal is a single goal. How can we use this information to help support kids? It's all about looking at that in both how we support them through our program and strengthening our programs, but also how we can target it to each student's individual needs and making sure that we're meeting those needs by understanding where their gaps are and then having conversations as a team on how to best support closing those gaps. And any questions?
Just want to thank you and for staying. The snowstorm didn't help us.
Thank you.
I do want to, I know Jim's question or statement wasn't directed to anybody, but I'm just curious if, on the other side of that, if you went to a teacher conference and you spent a half hour identifying or reviewing your kids' iReady routes, or if the opposite would be true, where you would be upset that the teacher was using too much of that to help or to discuss your child's progress. I think it's a balance, So I'm not sure,
Are you
either
looking for a
way.
response, or?
No, I'm making a statement, but you can respond.
No, I mean, I trust our faculty. I mean, I think we have great teachers in this district, and we're very fortunate. Me personally, I can speak to every teacher my child has had, and 4 children have had, and they've done a phenomenal job. So, and I trust their opinion. I weigh that very heavily, as opposed to someone just saying, hey, we're going to institute iReady or Alex, and we're going to use it as a measurement. If my teacher said to me personally, Mr. Smith, I think Thomas or Brown or Patrick or Finley can really benefit from taking this test because it will help me with instruction specifically for them in the classroom, I weigh that a lot heavier than just, a standardized test.
But just, it's odd that we're at this point. Someone had to ask for this. It didn't, I know that no one on the board at the time, asked the administration to look for a tool to increase our kids' grades or scores, or so it came from somewhere, just like Eureka did. So I'm just curious, it was born somewhere in
It wasn't
teachers.
me.
And I don't mean my comments to be an attack or an accusation or anything. I wasn't on the board when it was decided to use this.
I don't even think that's a board decision.
Well, okay.
So having heard what I heard, I still go back to, and I don't expect an answer, but I think that being able to go to your teacher, or your child, and ask them specific questions about iReady and Alex, and how that relates to where they are at the time that you're reviewing their report card, I think that's an important part that we should focus on, to make sure that they are getting the support they need to be able to explain to the parents exactly how does it correlate, and how does it compare to where their child was at the beginning of the year compared to when they were doing that. And so that's my only statement is, I'd like to make sure that we're supporting the teachers in making sure, and that goes back to, are we getting the support from Alex and iReady, the company, to be able to do that, to kind of have our teachers be in a position to readily speak about it, because maybe that's part of the issue. So.
Kate, I didn't mean to say it like that, but I guess my point is if you have the principals saying how great the tool is, I'd be very surprised for a board to say we're not going to continue that.
And I respect that opinion. I respect that it is, if this is something that I would not, as a trustee, vote against something that the principals are asking for. There are obvious benefits to it. I wonder how much of our time and resources and focus is being dedicated to this in addition to our financial investment, and what are we actually getting in return? Are our kids more excited to go to school? Are our teachers empowered to be creative and provide what our students need to succeed? Or do we just now have a lot of charts that tell us that our kids are doing better than the kids across the nation, and that we are seeing some growth? That's the only. I am not trying to make any other judgment other than that.
Next is votes and resolutions. Approval of minutes, January 22nd, 2019. Can I get a motion? Kim, you were absent. Can I get a motion? Jim, second. Aaron, any discussion or questions? If anyone wants to leave, I know it's late. This is just some
No, I want to
business
say
stuff. What's that?
But I'd like to say something.
Sure. Oh,
Yeah.
you might have to wait till the end, though. I'm sorry.
I know the drill.
Should be quick.
Whenever someone says that.
We do have like 9 policies to go through, but what are the resolutions? I'm sorry, so any discussion or questions for the minutes? No? Okay to vote? All in favor? 5-0, abstain, 1. Approval of CPSE, CSE, and 504 meeting summary memo dated February 13, 2019. Can I get a motion? Tim, second. Katie, any discussion or questions? Okay to vote? All in favor? 6-0. Approval of Treasurer's Report, December 2018. Motion? Jim, second. Katie, discussion or questions? Take a vote. All in favor? 6-0.
Sorry, did you say Jim or Kim made the motion?
Jim.
Jim.
Jim, and then Katie. Policies. First reading.
Thank you. Policy 5412, alternative formats for instructional materials. Mr. Meister.
This is a new required policy that basically is aligned with what we are already doing in the district, and that basically requires that any instructional materials that we require for students as part of our program are made available to students in a format that is acceptable to their needs, in alignment with either their IEP or 504 plan. And the policy is modified from the recommended original format of it to make it more broad-based so that it would be applicable should there be any modifications to the regulations and law. The policy would still remain accurate and in effect.
Mr. Arcuri, policy 5761, drug and alcohol testing for school bus drivers.
Yes, the changes to this policy were to align the drug and alcohol testing for the school bus drivers to the most current federal limits.
Mr. Meister, policy 5551, allocation of Title I funds.
This policy aligns with New York State and federal regulations for the use of Title I grant funds by school districts. The new policy is consistent with the existing and updated policy that was recently adopted by the board, 8260, the Title I Parent and Family Engagement Policy, and with existing practices that are associated with the disbursement of our Title I funds in the district. And that is what's on now.
Policy 7222, diploma or credential options for students with disabilities.
This policy has been updated to align with current regulations and law relate to the options for graduation credentials for students with disabilities. Under the new guidelines, students with disabilities have 4 pathways to graduation. These students may obtain a New York State Regents diploma, a local diploma, a CDOS or Career Development and Occupational Studies credential, or a Skills and Achievement Commencement credential. The policy provides a reference to our Commissioner's regulations and New York State Education Department guidance materials that give further details on each of these 4 options. It removes the detailed descriptions of each of these options from the policy and makes it so that regular revisions to these by the State Education Department do not require the district to have to revise and re-adopt this policy each time those changes are made. Finally, there's a paragraph in the current policy that mandates special education students are allowed to participate in all graduation-related activities should they meet certain requirements. That has been removed because it is now a regulatory requirement. We've always been complying with that anyway, and that covers this policy.
And last, 7520, accidents and medical emergencies.
Policy 7520 is a revised policy. There are two modifications to this policy that deals with the treatment to be provided to students who are injured or become ill while under the supervision of the school district. Under this revised policy, the language provides a clearer authority for the district to summon an ambulance without having to make efforts to contact a parent or person in parental relation first. This can reduce the response time into the situation in cases where time is of the most essence. At the same time, the language in this policy still calls for all reasonable attempts to be made to contact the parent or person in parental relation in order to include them in any emergency treatment decisions that may be necessary. Policy also has been revised to reflect how any student accident insurance policies the board may choose to adopt are to be structured, and that covers this policy.
Great, thank you. So, are we approved for a first reading? Okay. Okay. Adoption of resolutions. Board of Education resolutions, 1819-24 through 1819-185. Okay to take them as a block. Just a reminder, 1816 was withdrawn. Can I get a motion? Henry, second Kim. Discussion or questions? All in favor? 6-0. Curriculum instruction and assessment resolutions. Okay to take them as a block? Okay. Numbers 1819-187 through 1819-196. Motion. Katie, second. Aaron. Any discussion or questions? Get a vote. All in favor? 6-0. I'd like to thank SWORDA, SWR PTA Council, and Wildcat Athletic Club for their donations. Human Resources Resolutions. 1819-197, 1819-198. Can I get a motion? Henry, second. Aaron. Any discussion or questions? Okay to vote. All in favor? 6-0. Business and Operations Resolutions. Quite a bit here. Okay to take them as a block? Yes? Numbers 1819-199 through 248. Can I get a motion? Katie, second. Aaron, any discussion or questions?
Could I just have a quick clarification on 1819-205, the add alternate number 2 for the high school?
Clarification of why it was an alternate, or whether or not it's included? What are you looking for as far as the clarification?
Yeah, why was it an alternate, and in terms of scope of work, is there...
This is the mechanical work pertaining to the renovation of the main office?
Yeah, so I guess the...
I think it was covered in one of the updates. Why were we doing the breakout of the alternates, so we can get a better idea of the overall budget, whether or not to move forward with certain pieces of the project.
Okay.
So the bids came in very reasonable, and we're able to afford to move forward with alternate number 1. So that's proven across all of the trades.
Okay, so as a result, that alternate 2, I guess both of those alternates are intertwined. Is that what I'm hearing?
Alternate 1?
Alternate 1 and 2. Like, we can't just do alternate 1 without alternate 2, right? That's really the clarification I was looking for. And not that I would vote against it, I was just wondering, with some of the concerns that we've been having with ventilation in the high schools, I wanted to make sure that, and this is the clarification, that these 3 units are dedicated to that one area, and that we're not going to have any issues with surrounding areas in the high school. And I don't know, if that's something that can be, answered.
Mr. Arcuri?
Sure. The adding of the DX coils, which is what alternate number 2 is to add those coils to the 3 rooftop units here in order to provide AC to those areas. So then it was an alternate, similar to what Mr. Lewis stated. Prices have come in favorable. These are all interior instructional spaces that are serviced by these 3 particular units. So there isn't an option to put a window unit in. So in order to be able to provide air conditioning to these interior spaces at an additional cost of $65,000, it was
Are these instructional spaces, or these units?
Instructional spaces.
So they're not the units that correlate to the main office?
No.
I think that was your question.
Okay.
So it could be removed if deemed the board wanted to go that route.
Okay, I understand. Thank you.
Any other questions? Can I get a motion? I'm sorry, we already did that. Can we okay to vote? All in favor? 6-0. Personnel? Can I get a motion? Jim, second. Kim, any discussion or questions? Get a vote? All in favor? 6-0. Okay, communications, Janice?
Just this PTA showcase dinner, March 20th, if anybody wants to go.
When's the deadline?
I don't know, I had it on my computer, but my computer battery died.
Battery died, we've been here too long.
Came too long.
All right, if you just let us know in an email. Thank you. Moving on, no discussion items, additional comments from residents.
Oh, please.
That one quick, right?
I don't know, my legs.
Quickest part of the night.
I kind of feel like I'm wasting my time anyway, because some of it's been addressed by Mrs.
Okay.
Hunt. But my question is, Mary Sheridan Shoreham, speaking as a parent, not as an employee tonight. My daughter is in the 8th grade, and both I-ready scores are what I feel completely below grade level. The fall was 6th grade, and in one of them, her comprehension seems to be low on both, was 3rd grade. So I did speak to Mr. Van about that after I was highly disappointed that a teacher didn't inform me or say, extra help is Tuesday and Thursday, and we need to get in here. Her most recent one is still below grade level, grade 7, and comprehension text is grade 7. I don't know where, if it's early, beginning, or end, but we are well into over 100 days of 8th grade. My daughter has not hit one time grade level. So what I'm seeing is this program seems like a great thing for our elementary school because there's other tools they're using to use as benchmarks and assessments. If I heard correctly, it's this, the classroom grade, and probably the final exam. My daughter has carried a 92 average in both 6th and 7th grade, honor roll all 4 quarters, both grades, and she can't get on grade level. So my question is, how is that happening? Why haven't, if Mr. Meinster is telling me that teachers are looking at it and possibly grouping and working and targeting areas, I've never got anything about Eileen's comprehension and come in and let's try this, or as a whole, the 7th grade, the 8th grade is not doing well, so we're going to change something and do this instead of reading this book. I spoke to her English teacher, parent conference, told her my concern that I know what's coming down the pipe for 9th grade English, and I don't believe my daughter is ready. She absolutely agreed. I will say the one thing about the teachers in the middle school, they want these kids to succeed. I honestly trust I appreciate their honesty when talking to me, but now I say to myself, we got 80 days left of school. She's not ready for 9th grade English. I guess I'm getting a tutor to help her. It was recommended that Eileen go on iReady late fall. But you know what I got? Are you kidding me? I have to go on that now at home? So they're not getting the help on the iReady in the classrooms. It's like Mr. Meinster said, 3 times a year, that's it, 6 hours. I think 6 hours of English could maybe have helped her comprehension scores instead of sitting in front of a computer for an hour at a time to take these exams. It clearly is not being used the way it's being used at the elementary level. So as a parent, I'm disappointed. I have opted Eileen out of the ALEC program middle of last year to this year. They seem to use Castle Learning, which was not mentioned at all today in the math program. When I asked the teacher, I guess Castle Learning gives a teacher more opportunity to choose the type of questions they'd like the kids to be working on, where ALEC works depending on your level. So I'm not going to have her work on ALEC if they're not even using it in the classroom. I'd rather her work, have extra credit, extra questions given on Castle Learning, if that's what they're really using to assess these kids. She got a 50-question homework assignment on ALEC. On Castle Learning, nothing about ALEC. So I really don't think taking her out of English for 6 hours and math out of 6 hours a year is fair anymore. She could be getting extra help for that hour that she's on that test and bringing up her comprehension scores. So I just want to let you know, I echo some of the concerns that Mrs. Hunt had, and I think right now this is not helping our middle schoolers. And who knows? I guess based on your numbers, Eileen is either falling through the cracks or she's that tiny percent that's not really, from last January to this January, her score went up 4 points. As a parent, that doesn't sound like a very big percentage from last winter to this winter on this program.
So I see no improvement whatsoever. So for that, she won't be taking the last part of the assessment in the spring, because it's wasting my time. If, Mr. Meinster, if you're telling me that when a child is 6 months behind on grade level, there's intervention, there was none on my daughter. She's still a whole grade level behind. But she's a grade level behind here, but she's maintaining a 92. And I hear that it's subjective, but maybe because my daughter's a good kid, teacher sees how hard she's working, maybe her grade is inflated a little bit more because she's a good girl. But I'm getting two different concerns here. One, she's doing really well. Assessment, no way. No way, no way. And the same thing with math. Assessment was done in November. Regents questions. Came home. She said, I rocked it, Mom, I rocked it. 85. Oh, really? I didn't. Okay. Email the teacher. No. That was on a curve. Her real score was 58. So for parents that didn't know that that math assessment was on a curve, is thinking their child had mastered September through November. And that's not the case. So for that reason, I'm getting very disappointed in the middle school programs because the math, I know what she's doing. I see her grades, they fluctuate. So when she comes home thinking she did so well on an assessment, and I have to say, you didn't do that well. But we'll take it for what it is. Just disappointing.
Any other additional comments from residents?
Good evening. My name is Stacy Tingo. I'm a little slap happy. Being so tired, and I'm sure you all are. I have a question about some of the items that were brought up this evening. I saw that they're doing the Chromebooks in the high school. Is that in replacement of the math labs that were brought up at some meeting a while back? I know there was discussion on math labs. So is the Chromebooks to replace that?
I don't believe so, but I'll let Mr. Poole.
No, not at all. But the Chromebooks will replace the need for all the laptop carts that are in high school and give greater access. But there is a goal and a plan to implement a Mac lab in the high school in one of the existing computer labs. So by increasing the Chromebooks in the high school, we should be able to free up some space in there for Macs to be installed and implemented in there. We're right now looking at what are our best options, the best model, rolling that out. So no.
Okay, so that will be for 1920, the math labs.
The Mac lab. I want to say no, but I do want to say that we're hoping to pilot some Macs in that space this year using some of our open equipment lines just to get some of that going.
Okay. Then I have a question about this resolution, 1819-207. On the line under electrical construction. Okay, I see the LED theatrical dimming lighting system.
Right.
The company that's being used, what type of, do they have a background in theater and music? Or are they just a general?
I hope so.
Well, you say hope so, but do they?
I think the architect provided detailed specs in his design, and those specs need to be made, or they won't allow them to install the equipment.
But does that architect know anything?
I hope so. We've been paying a lot of money. I hope he knows what he's doing. I mean, Glenn, you want to take that?
Yes. Sure. Hello. Hi. They are experienced at outfitting theaters.
Did they hire a consultant to help with that work?
I don't know the answer to that
Yeah,
question.
I know that was another concern about the qualified
They had a theater consultant.
staff that was used to review the auditorium. Did they ever do that? Because I know as of a few meetings ago, they
There was,
had
yes.
one.
Yes, they had reviewed the upstairs. That's what you're referring
No, I'm
to.
talking about the whole, the infrastructure, the electrical system. Usually when you do a renovation like that, just like you would a turf field, you would bring in a company like Land Tech. So for an auditorium, you'd bring in a professional that's been in the theater or music. So
They actually brought in an engineer in order to review the dimming system requirements as as well as replacement of the incandescent lighting to a LED system. So there was an electrical engineer brought in for that particular piece. As far as a theatrical consultant, they did use a company in order to identify what would be a system that would, at the bare minimum, replace what we currently have, as well as bring it to the next level. That's what the upgrade to the LED lights provide us the opportunity to actually do.
Okay, but that same person would also then assess the sound system that should be done
Yes.
in the future. So is that slotted for this summer?
Yes.
The sound system? for-
Sound system, speakers, infrastructure, AV equipment, the LED dimming system, and I'm really happy to report as well, like I mentioned earlier, not only that, but the LED lighting hardware. I know we've had some complaints about the heat coming off the, yes, so the lights as well, so the prices came in great, so that is some work that's going to be
Okay, because
happening.
I didn't see the speaker, the sound system in a resolution. Is that on
That was
that?
part
Of
of
the base.
A base
Yeah.
package.
These are just alternates that were,
Okay. Where could I find that information?
You know what, if you want to give my office a call in the morning, we're happy to share.
No, the reason why I question, because now all of a sudden I see an exterior field sound system, but I don't see a sound system for the theater on here.
Look at the first one. Look at
I see renovations for main office.
EC base. Go all the way up to the top
Okay.
on that resolution.
EC1 base bid?
Yes.
Okay.
It is part of that particular number.
so when we bid this out, there were some items that if the numbers came in too high, we were going to remove and not do it. So the sound system was one of those items that we did not want to risk potentially removing from the scope. That's why it's included with what Glenn's describing as the base scope. So that's in the project, no matter what the numbers were going to be. That's something we weren't going to remove.
And then how are they, so they're doing the sound system and the lighting this summer? And still nothing?
And I believe the lighting that was selected was actually an upgrade from what was in the bond. Correct?
Yes, the LED hardware and replacing the fixtures is definitely an upgrade of what was in there.
All right, that's fine, thank you.
Any other questions?
Thanks, everybody. I'm shocked with us here. There was a lot of questions before about the,
Can you state your name, please?
oh, Carla Roberts, I'm sorry. I teach fourth grade here, and I also have 2 children in the district. There was a lot of questions that came up about Alex and iReady and math, so I figured, as I was sitting out there, maybe I could help explain something from being in the classroom, the perspective that I have. Both Eureka and Alex and iReady are all correspond to our grade level standards. And basically the standards we have are the Common Core standards that came down about 8 years ago. And they build every year. So you have numbers and operations, fractions, geometry, and you can see that across the grade levels. And basically what happens is as you go through the grade levels, you add on more content and more difficulty, higher level thinking. So Alex is broken down where it covers those different standards, and you can break down the standards. When they are being assessed in Alex, or they're doing it at home or in the classroom, it might not necessarily be on what we're doing in the classroom. Right now, my class, we're doing fractions. It depends on where their levels are. Some kids who are struggling in the basic number operations and are below grade level math, perhaps if I logged them into Alex tomorrow, they would be working on addition, subtraction, helping to work on practicing that. Same thing goes for the iReady. It covers our standards, but again, if you put them onto iReady, it's going to hone in on the skills that they need practice with, and it'll giving them that practice until the system feels like it's mastered it. Can I say that, you know, if I put a child on iReady tomorrow, that it'll definitely correlate to what I'm doing in the classroom? No, it won't, but it'll definitely correlate to the fourth grade standards. And, you know, when they're doing ALEX, if they get to geometry, let's say, which is what we came across for fourth grade in the winter, we hadn't started geometry yet. So it was really based on what they had learned in third grade, which was why it was so much lower than the rest of number and operations and other standards that we had covered in the fourth grade material. The way we use ALEX, and I'll speak for myself. iReady, you know, to account for some of the differences. iReady on the elementary level, when you take iReady, it's multiple choice. You have to read short passages, they answer multiple choice. And we use TC. Our reading program is very different. It's structured very differently than what iReady is, which is not necessarily a bad thing. Being able to answer multiple choice questions in reading, I think, is important that they be able to do that. But again, it's different than our reading and writing program, and it's also different than our TC running records. When they do a running record with us, they're given, you know, a short passage, and the kids can write responses about it, but they can also have a discussion with you. You ask the questions, and they give you a response, and you copy it down to them. But we're not putting them in front of the computer for the running records. I personally use both pieces of data to look at. I have had kids where they'll come in with a certain reading level, and then look at the iReady and do another iReady, and there's a discrepancy, and I personally will look into it and find out kind of what's going on here. I've had a few kids who, they're reading on grade level, they are for me, they're reading their independent books on grade level, and they do the iReady, and they're grade level, a grade or two behind, and it's a red flag. I've had a few kids retake it because there was that discrepancy. I wanted to find out what's the deal. It turns out the kid wasn't feeling well that day. And he ended up being sick for a few days after, and then, came to, oh yeah, that's right, he was sick. So there are sometimes those fluke things that do happen. The RTI time, just to clarify, we don't have all the kids in the classroom at that time, so we are not teaching new instruction. So if we are doing, let's say, vocabulary work, which was something that we I think it's probably all grade levels, we've come up with the vocabulary being a point. We can do small group work, but again, we don't have the whole class there. So that's when you do that work in TC. There is no separate vocabulary program. Lou and I joked about it. I've come to him and say, what are we going to do about this? Because they have their independent books, but they're all, they all read at different levels, they have different interests. I don't force them to read certain independent reading level books. They make the choice based on their, what reading level they're on. But vocabulary, has been a concern for us. But again, you can't, teach lessons during RTI time when you don't have a whole class there. And we've been instructed not to do new instruction for that. And I guess what I was going to go with, what I was going to add on to that was just everything is basically aligned to the standards, including the Eureka Math program, ALEX, and iReady. That's pretty much it. I'm very tired right now. But I tried to write down as many notes as I could on my phone, and I kind of lost some. But
Since you came up, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
So do you use ALEX and iReady as a tool to assist the students?
I personally do.
Okay.
When I had my conferences, I don't want to speak for everybody because I'm only standing up here speaking on behalf of myself. I like to look at the comparison. If a kid is struggling in ALEX, I like to hone in on what is the concern. Kids that are going out for RTI, let's say in math, they look at the information and see, okay, this kid's below grade level. They're not doing Eureka Math when they go outside for RTI. They're doing Do the Math, which is kind of filling in the gaps because those kids really struggle with the basic number concepts. So they need more support with that. And we fill in the support with extra help with the fourth grade math, the program Eureka we have. But at my conferences, I've encouraged parents to have their kids go on at home if they like. I mean, I think a lot of it is the tone you set with the kids on it. You know, if you are a downer about it, you certainly set the tone for the whole class. And you can bring them down pretty quickly, just with the way you present it. But I do use Alex and I do encourage the kids and parents alike to have them go on at home if they choose. Some do, some don't, and some are very excited about it, and some are, okay, no problem. But I like to correlate the data, because a reading assessment is just a reading assessment. But in my opinion, the more tools you have to look at and compare, the more helpful it is for me to really put my finger on it and to better help the student.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Comments? Okay. We have second exec. No. You guys get to go home, we don't. Thank you for all coming. Can I get a motion? Jim, second. Katie. All in favor? You can vote no, but which one you got? 6-0. And the reason for a second exec is to discuss collective negotiations pursuant to Article 14 of the Civil Service Law in relation to SWORA. Thank you. Thank you all, and have a good night.